Super. Perfect. Hampus Jakobsson, is it the spelling of the family name? Is this correct?
That's great.
Super. I'm from Austria, so basically it's I think there's some prefix. What I want to start with the first question that I would like to ask you is I watched your videos on YouTube and they are fantastic. And you speak in English without any accent. Why?
I think it's the very simple fact that I'm the fourth kid. So I grew up with essentially 5 parents because my 3 older brothers are so much older than I am. So I can change if you want, and I can do it in British English if you make it that easier.
Great.
Or I can change and do it with a French accent if you think that it makes me more authentic from Paris. And I can just switch between a lot of accents. And I think that's the trait you learn when you're the 4th child. It's like you have to just figure out how to get attention, even if you're the worst person in the room.
How many languages do you speak?
I speak only, I would say, English and Swedish. I used to speak French. I used to work in Paris back in '99, and I had quite an extraordinary French teacher. So I actually did speak French, not like Americans speak French, but I actually do speak French for real. But it's 20 years ago, so I don't speak French. I had a small stint when I spoke a bit of Japanese because I worked in Japan, but so little that I would say like I wouldn't rank myself on that scale at all. So that's it. And then I can order Coca-Cola in German, more or less. That's kind of the level I'm at. So
that's great.
Very few languages for real.
And in which country do you live currently?
I live in southern Sweden. So I live essentially on the other side of the water here. It's Copenhagen. So on the map, it looks like I live in Copenhagen, but I live on the other side of the little water there. So I usually jokingly say I live in the Brooklyn of Copenhagen. It's like the suburbs of the Danish capital.
How is the life there?
I think what I like about it is that it's in the current stage of my life. I think it's really perfect because it's like I bike to work. It's like there's a very large beach and like water. I do a lot of water kayaking. It's an amazing place to go run. So it's like half an hour from really nice nature. I think a lot of those things. I think the headache is that there are 300,000 people in total, and it used to be an industrial city. Has a university, had a lot of stuff, that stuff, but it has a very low factor of like crazy ambitious tech people. And I realized the last 10 years that is a very good thing for me. I think it used to be like 10 years ago, I always fled and like I worked in, Paris and München and in London and Korea and a lot of other places to try to get out and meet like crazy people who did crazy stuff. And then I realized that now in my 40s, I actually really enjoy it because I work all the time on Zoom, right? Like I live online. And I think it's great to be in a city where, there's just not a lot of distractions. And it sounds really sad and complacent, but I realized how it actually is superb for me. And I end up working like a couple of weeks in London and in Paris and other places with our companies that I invested in. And every time I go, I feel like, oh, I love this week. And on the Friday when I'm going home, I feel like, oh, it's so good that I'm going home because I've been so just like so intense, like, a cocktail and then a dinner, then this. And I feel like, fuck, I just want to go to bed and read my book. And I'm a super boring person. I really enjoy like, listening to podcasts, reading lots of fiction books, and just like being into my own little small things, playing computer games or enjoying stuff with my kids. So I feel like dinners and cocktails are not my thing.
Let me dive into, before we come to the professional part of the podcast, in this private section. You mentioned you love listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
You enjoy reading and computer games. Can you recommend one book, one podcast, and one game to the audience?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that on a book, I read quite a lot. I think that everybody should read. I think that I'm really happy that I read a lot of fiction. And I think it's like I had a period when I was a kid when I read a lot of fiction. And then I got out of it and started reading business books and got really into business books and felt how it made me a better person. But then I like realized that how business books are a very kind of projected flat surface of like how the world works, like very kind of Western atomized personalities. And then I just completely switched. So I only listen to business books and like other kind of books about fungi or whatever, like all the kind of textbooks. I love listening to them when I bike or run or something. But I just like, I read fiction. So I would say the book I would really recommend, I think that I really enjoyed A Little Life. I think it's a really good book. It's a book that is a lot about tension and ambition and how like even working with some of your best friends can actually be really horrible in one sense. I really, really liked it. It was a lot of years since I read it, but I really, really loved it. And last year I read Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, which is a love novel between two software developers and a game developer company. And I think it's like I really, really enjoyed that book in so many aspects because it's written in a very quirky way. And I think that the last comment about fiction is I think what we don't realize about fiction is that we've invented this ancient technology that allows us to teleport our minds and bodies into somebody else's mind and body and can actually be that person for hundreds and hundreds of hours or pages. And it's crazy because when you read a book, like you are that, right? And even if you watch a movie, it's not the same level because then you're being fed. So I think that it's amazing to be able to be teleported in somebody's body. I think on podcasts, I always say like, I think that Conversations with Tyler is like one of my favorite podcasts. And one of the reasons I think is that Tyler Cohen asks questions like nobody else. He does extraordinary amount of research and then he asks the most esoteric questions. And what I really like is the fact that he actually is a very broad host. Like he interviews anybody from like Knausgård about how he's writing books to kind of famous economists or famous venture capital people for that sense. And I think it's so amazing because like he has this amazing episode about a person who, now I'm blanking on her name, but who translated the Odyssey and the Iliad, the recent English translation. And it's just like one of those things where you just feel like, how can this be interesting? But then you listen to the interview and it's actually really interesting. It's really, really good. And then on game, I love all games that there are two strategies. There's a linear strategy and there's an exponential strategy, whereas like you take the linear one and you kind of quickly looks good what you're doing, but if the game goes on long enough, you will lose against somebody who does a more like build strategy. And the recent game I've fallen in love with is Hexergy. I really, really like Hexergy. It's like a card and forex game, and I think it perfectly sets the balance. Like you can be very short term, but that bites you in the ass further on. But I have to say, today, which is the 24th of October, is the day when City Skylines 2 is released. So I would just put a plug for City Skylines, which I think is one of the best city simulations games. I'm very lucky to have 3 kids that I share this love with. So like it's so great to have a 15-year-old and 2 12-year-olds that I can nerd out with and play games with.
You're blessed. You have a great excuse to play games.
Exactly. I don't like it at all. It's for my kids.
Yeah, definitely. It's your job as a father, so you have
exactly.
To
that's the
be a
only
good
thing.
father.
I'm trying to be a good parent. That's exactly the thing. It's gonna be tricky in 10 years when I have to like pretend that I'm like practicing or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but then I think grandkids are then the next
Grandkids.
step.
Exactly. Thank you. That's good.
That's the next solution. You mentioned you love reading fiction books.
Mm-hmm.
When I think back the last 30 years of my life, I always heard business people shouldn't read fiction books. They should stick with nonfiction and make the most out of their time. And what's the advantage? What do people gain in the business environment, in your opinion, when they also use some of their time to delve into good fiction?
I think they're apart from like mind traveling, I think there are 2 things I find really, really interesting is that it depends on what kind of fiction you read, but you can read books like you can like A Little Life, which is like, it's or Purple Hibiscus. It's just like great books of transporting you into someone else's life and actually and I think it builds enormous amount of empathy. Like it just teaches you how other people sees the world. And I think you can see it super short term as like, if you want to be good, become a good negotiator or whatever, just understanding that, like, like growing up in Ireland as a gay man meant that, and then during the 80s, fleeing to the US during the HIV, like quote unquote gay pandemic, like you just realize that, oh my God, I've never thought about this like in this way. Like for me, it was a fact in a history book, but this is a real person, right? And I think that's like, it's an extraordinary way of just understanding other people. It's like the longest conversations you can have with somebody at 2 a.m. in the middle of the night over a glass of wine. But this is just you and them, and you can pace it anytime you want, which is extraordinary. And they don't get too drunk. That's his book. It's like you can have the conversation. The other reason I think it is like I used to be extremely fascinated reading science fiction, and then I completely got out of it. But I think there's a new way of science fiction, which I think is really extraordinary, which are very much, I think what science fiction allows us to do is like we're able to create a world in which the world, like the system around the world is different, and it allows us to simulate different questions. So like, what happens when we can upload minds? Or like I see you have Andrew Weiss books on their shelf. Like when we can transport people to the moon, how will the economical system of the moon, like what is the economy of the moon? Like if we build a moon base, what would the economy be? And I think that the books I generally love, if I would just like boil them down, is that either somebody really thought through how something will work in the future and not technology. Because like if you take even Neil Stephenson, like if you take a thing that somebody get into how you transport into space, the thing is that technology really moves in such surprising ways. But if you take the things that are human aspects, like identity or economy, these things are so interesting to, I think, to simulate because we're so stuck in our ways. Like 10 years ago, most people believed we had two genders. Like I think it's interesting. And then let's like transport into the future and we talk about mind uploading. What if you mind upload a person, a biological person who was female when she lived, into a male body? What is the new person? Like, is the new person a female in a male body, or who kind of like a parasite, or is it like a male that stole a female's mind? What is that person? And there are amazing books like Archete, what's her first name? Maritime Archete wrote like amazing books about that, about like identity and mind uploading. And I think it's like one of the few ways you actually can. And the other ones on the books are the ones that do that, but they do it with, instead of doing it in the future, they do it in history, where like Purple Hibiscus or something, which allows you to be like, what would it be like kindled by what's her name now, super famous American author, where like a black woman in the 90s gets transported back into slavery times in the US, where she is still black, but she's in a time where being black meant that you're a slave. And then every like fourth or fifth chapter, she kind of wakes up in her body in the 80s in LA, where being a person of color isn't that easy, but it's of course way better than it was, 100 years earlier. And I think one of those things that if you're a white man in, southern Sweden, like I think about color, but I don't think about what it would be to be a person of color in the 90s in LA, and I don't think about how it is to be a person of color in the, in the US South, 100 years earlier. And I think it's one of those things. It's just facts and history book. So I think these are reasons I think everybody should read more fiction.
You mentioned two parts of fiction. So one is entire fiction, so it's completely made up. And the other part, I understood that you also enjoy reading biographies or fiction that...
No, I wouldn't call it biographies. I really enjoy when the books are like, they have I think that I don't enjoy reading books that are completely everything is fictional and all bets are off. So like I used to, when I was a kid, I used to do a lot of fantasy. But I think that fantasy is the easiest way of just saying, and then he did another spell. And then you go like, okay, so they're all bets are off. And I think it's very hard to learn anything from those books. I think I enjoy fantasy as a way of just relaxing the mind because everything's archetypical. There's one strong person, there's one thief, there's one magician, there's one white. Oh, okay. But they're great for like just relaxing and like it's kind of going with a swim with your friends. I think what I like about I like both sides, both the empathic books and the conceptual books, they're based on something where there's no magical formulas. They're like, if we build a base on the moon, how on earth will we sustain that economically? Who will pay for it? And like, there's Golem the Genie is an amazing other book. Like Helen Wecker, it's an extraordinary good book. It's about the shift of the century. It's 20th century, so it's like 1905 in New York, and the two characters is a Jewish clay golem and a female Jewish clay golem and a male fire spirit, the genie, Arabian genie, who kind of falls in love. And what's really amazing about it is that Helen Wecker is able to talk about gender 1905 in New York in a way that gets no knee-jerk response, because it's not about a man and a woman. For God's sake, it's about a golem and a genie. But the thing is that the stereotypes of golem and genie are very gender stereotypical, which means that it tricks the reader into reading it and not getting any knee-jerk response, but still realizing that these roles, they're so cemented and it's so interesting to read about it. And it's an historical fiction novel about New York in the turn of the century. So like there's so much fact, but there's so much people. And I really love that.
Great points. I completely agree to the empathy part. It helps understanding people better. You mentioned a couple of times gender. In your opinion, what makes this topic important these days in the business world?
I think that for me is that I truly, truly believe that there's an inner life and an outer life of every person, and we're just oversimplified it so absurdly much. I think we look at people, and when we see them after 1 minute, we have just inferred all of our previous historical knowledge upon them, and we know who they are, and their inner life is completely different most often. And I think that one of the things that I was extremely lucky about when I was a kid is that I've kind of been in a situation where I feel like I've always been allowed to be my quirky self. And it's very easy to say that as like a white man living being born and bred in a kind of socialist, kind of very stable country. But I think that I had this really lucky moment. It was great when I was a kid. I came home from school. I had like drawn a thing, and my oldest brother is 11 years older than I am. And I put I think it was an apple or something I drew, and I put it on the fridge at home. And I was super proud of like my beautiful apple, 7-year-old drawing. Probably not very good. And next to it was like a very awesome handmade version of an MC Escher, like the Dutch artist, like extraordinary 3-dimensional drawing that my oldest brother had done. And I looked at it and I realized that objectively, I just sucked. Like I saw that like he's good, I'm bad. And it was like, I just like, lowered my shoulders in the bad way and like felt my heart sinking, like, I suck. Okay, too bad. I was really happy about my apple. And then my dad came in and he looked at it and he was like, oh, it's amazing. Very nice done. Well, really nice done of you. And what happened to me is like, I realized for that second is that I suck, but I'm accepted anyway. And the funny thing is like, I didn't understand the truth, which maybe the apple looked good. I don't know. And also that parents love their kids unconditionally quite a lot. But I think what's really good for me is like, I realized that moment, like, if I want to at a party talk to somebody about mycorrhizal spores, I should be allowed to do that. Like I shouldn't be like, oh, what am I supposed to say? Oh, interest rate is going high and how's the weather? So I can't do that. I can't small talk. Like I'm the person that always says the thing that gets people a bit like, why the fuck are you talking about this? Like I really enjoy like just these conversations because those are real conversations about anything. And I think that I really truly believe that like internally, I'm not one person. I am like an emergent phenomenon by like lots of parts of my brain that are trying to stabilize different things right now. And if you sat down with me and told me that I was actually a woman and my body looked the way I was, but I was actually a woman, I think that I would like, I think I would like act differently because you told me I was a woman. And I think that I would, I'm not sure if that's for the better or the worse. And I think what's fascinating is like just, 10, 20 years ago, this was not a debate. Like your inside and your outside is the same. And I think gender is, for me, just a lens on neurodivergence in general. It just shows that we should not like, we should go further than just the surface.
How much further should we go, in your opinion?
I think that this actually is a really good question. I actually think one complicated thing I think about this actually a lot is I think that sometimes I think that any kind of labeling is great. Like if you taste a wine, if you can like you kind of sense the tannins and you're like, okay, this is like oak flavored, that allows you to dig deeper and find the blackberry or the chocolate or whatever you're looking for. But sometimes I think that when we do that with people, I think we're underestimating the multiplicity and like the all the kinds of people we are internally. So sometimes if you're given a diagnose or just any kind of label, you're just like, oh, it's sorry, it's just me. Like I have ADHD, I'm really sorry, it's very hard for me to do this. I think that sometimes can be a relief for the person saying it, but sometimes I think it gives you a bit of an excuse to kind of behave however you want. And I think that I have not really personally settled where I am on this one. Like I joke quite a lot with my wife. My wife is a high sensitive person, so it's HSP, what it's called, and and she's very introverted. And it's funny because like we have this very good joke, and I think that the banter is okay. But sometimes she says like, "Well, actually, an HSP, this is really hard." And then usually I say like, as a PTQR, I need to do really weird jokes or something, and I just like it's a banter between us, and I wouldn't want to do it in a public room because I think that people could feel really insulted because you don't know how it feels for me. And I understand that. And I think that's why we need a lot of acceptance for that. The miles you've traveled are your miles. But I'm sometimes worried that, for me at least, is like only in my own, not caring about your journey at all. If somebody told me, this is the description of how you are, I'm afraid that I would actually act differently. I think it would be comforting, but I think there's a risk that I think that I would lean further into that. And I don't know. I am really happy that we do talk about this, but I think that it's a very good question of how we handle it in the public discourse. I think that also, a very interesting thing about culpability, if you take it even further, like if you say that this person shot this person and they say, oh, they have this diagnosis, does that mean they go to jail or not? And I think it becomes very interesting. And I think then you get back into, why do we have jails? Do we have jails to keep people away from society? Then it doesn't matter what your diagnosis is, because if you're dangerous to society. But do we, instead of a more of a Christian view, do we put people in jail to punish them for what they did? Then culpability is very important. It's like, are they actually to blame for what they did? Or are we to put people in prison to retrain them? Then we have to ask a question of how possible it is to retrain a person. And I think that this, is what I love about when you get into these conversations, because then you get to talk about fabric of society. And one thing I love is that I love when we introduce a new thing like gender or Bitcoin or anything else, and it allows us to stare at the old system And I think that, you know, when Bitcoin came around, people are like, it's not real money. And like, you know, it's just because we all like believe it's real. And they'll just like hold up a dollar bill and like, what is this then? It's just because we all believe it's real. Like this is all fake. And I think those things are so great because sometimes maybe Bitcoin should be or shouldn't be, but the most important part of it is it allows us to have a metaphysical and conceptual conversation about money and value, and is it store of value? Is it a, you know, what is it actually? And I think that we need that conversation about many things, be it gender, be it identity, be it money, be it, you know, culpability. I think it's really good to just to zoom out sometimes, have that conversation.
Great points. Great points. You mentioned labels in what you said. In your opinion, when do we need labels, or what does it help labeling something, describing it clearly, and when is it hindering?
I think that labels are extraordinary for very fast communication. I think we've all been in a situation where like you and I are going to watch a movie and I say, oh, I really want to watch this movie, Christian, it's really great, it's one of my favorite horror movies, and you'll be like, I don't want to watch more horror movies, like I'm sorry, I'm not doing horror. And I was like, oh, okay, sorry, okay, let's move on. I really like this feel-good movie. I'm into feel-goods, you know? So I think it's really good because it allows us to quickly kind of traverse large landscapes and be like, oh, I'm sorry. I think the danger part is I think that sometimes I think that we box our mind into stuff when we don't allow certain fields to be traveled. And I think the headache is often that like it's not that we're not allowed. It's like I think there's so many levels of allowed, right? It's the great, I think I love this quote, which is technology enabled, culture decides. And it's the same that, you know, like the same here. It's like, it's not that you're not allowed to date people who have another physical body than you have, or should not. But the headache is it comes in layers. It's like you might feel that you're not allowed. You might quote unquote know that your parents would allow you. You might quote unquote know that society wouldn't allow it. You might actually legally know that society wouldn't allow it because you're in a country that means death. And I think these things, I think labeling makes it very complicated, because then suddenly you actually you see the label and you're like, I don't like horror movies, and I can be no, Last of Us is not a horror movie, it's actually an extraordinary TV series. I think it's one of the best TV series. Episode 3 is one of the best episodes done in a long time in TV series, and you'll be like, I don't want to watch horror movies, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said horror. It's sure there are a couple of like jumpy moments, and I hate horror movies too, but there's something in it that is really human and like really about love actually. And you're like, oh, I hate love movies. I was like, Christian, it's not that kind of love movie, you know what I mean? And now you don't want to watch The Last of Us because you think it's a love horror movie, and that sounds like the worst combo. And it's one of those things that, how do I then do it? Like, you know, I think that if you go back to wine tasting, we've always been in that situation. Like, I don't like red wines, or I don't like Italian wines. It's like, have you tried all Italian wines? Obviously not. Like, it's a really strange way to say it.
I'm smiling. I live in Vienna, so Vienna is a very nice place to live. It's a high quality of living, a high living standard. But on the other side, on the flip side, it's not the friendliest population here. So I was smiling when you said, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like this. So it describes very well living in Vienna, basically, as a side joke. Let's
No, but I
come
think
to...
it's, but I actually want to comment on that. I think that I don't like, have you seen the Richard Florida map of like, I mean, tolerance, technology, and talent, of like where like things boom, right? You want really strong university, you want a lot of talent, right? You want yeah, let's see, you want talent, technology, you want like, you know, really hardcore, like, you know, the Stanfords or the Ciscos or whatever, but then you also need tolerance. So the thing is that what makes certain parts of the globe really like vibrant is that they have tolerance. And I think conservatism isn't the most tolerant. And I think that almost all people go through this when they're young, they're like super, super tolerant and super, super liberal. And then they come into their like 25, 30s, and then they start paying loan for their house and the interest rate and the mortgages and and they become less and less tolerant, and other people are messing up the street and waste and immigration, and they get really angry about it. And then in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they kind of relax and be like, we should all just love each other. And I think it's this funny curve of like liberal, conservative, liberal. And I think that then, of course, you have geographical areas which are extremely liberal or extremely conservative. And I like one of our companies and a good friend, Chris, who lives in Vienna, we always talk about the fact that Vienna is like one of the best places on the world to live. And it's funny, it is like actually statistically with a lot of markers, but it's still hard because it's very comfortable.
You mentioned tolerance, which I find quite interesting. Can you explain it a little bit further? What does tolerance mean to you?
I think that, I mean, there's tolerance in two aspects. I think that there's a tolerance which I think is more like a stoic part of tolerance, which I think is which is just like what what are you willing to put up with? Like, it's like somebody does, like if somebody would like flick their fingers in front of your eyes, or have a voice that irritates you, or something. That's just like the microaggressions of the day, where you're like, it just frustrates me. But then I think there's a deeper thing which you don't even understand, where like, are you tolerant to other people's views of life? It's like, and I think the thing for me, it's like in computer science, you always talk about, when you design algorithms, you talk about explore versus exploit. Another amazing book, which is like the blank on the book now, Algorithms to Live By. Extraordinary good book, which takes big algorithms and it actually applies them to human situations, like finding an apartment to live in and stuff like that. It's a really good book. And I think we ask ourselves, are you currently in explore or exploit mode? And explore in algorithms means that you try to find new solutions, and exploit means like you're trying to find the best, quickest way. So if you go to Netflix right now and read the recommendations for you, probably 80% of the movies or TV series here in front of you are exploit. It's like what they think you would like. And then 10-20% are explore, where they're like, maybe you like this, and and the only way to learn is you have to have explore. Like, if I only show you exploit, the thing is that you will be satisfied, but I will never learn, and therefore you will give up on me eventually. And I think that one of the very interesting thing about explore versus exploit is, like, when you're a kid, you have extraordinary high explore. Like, you just put anything in your mouth to feel like, will this kill me? How does it taste? And the older you get, the more exploit you feel. Like, if you ask like your old uncle or aunt who's like in their 80s, they go to the same restaurant every day. And the reason is simple. They might not live to have 4 more meals out, so they're going to goddamn have the Wiener Schnitzel like they like. And I think that, like, I understand that. And it's really funny because, like, I think that's a question I usually ask myself. Like, I am very much in a perpetual explore mode. Like, I am very uninterested in leveraging blah, 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 and like making sure, like, I think that I could chosen careers to like be more like higher status and wealthy or whatever I want, because I would have like honed in on what I'm really good at. But I usually feel like I'm actually on the opposite. I feel like any time in life I've been the smartest person in the room, I usually try to find other rooms. I just feel like I don't want to be in this room, because I don't want to be in the room where I'm not learning. I want to be in the room where I am trying to learn. And I think maybe that comes from upbringing. Like, if you're the first child, like I had 10 years of my life, more like 15 years of my life, when I was the least knowledgeable, right? Like, I had no idea what's going on. I'm just struggling to keep up with the pace. And I think I've been shaped into that person so much that the second somebody turns around and says, genuinely, what do you think? And we're going to do exactly what you say right now, I feel really uncomfortable, because that never happened when I was a kid.
One question to tolerance, still on my mind. I would like to hear your opinion on that. Is there any boundary to tolerance, or in your opinion, does it mean being tolerant is accepting everything that happens in the world, or is there any line where you say, okay, no, this is too far?
No, absolutely. I know that's a very good question. I think that I'm very much in Benjamin Franklin wrote this, don't pollute other people's minds. I think don't pollute, I think is like what he wrote. And I think that the thing for me is that I think whatever you do, you do you. Like, whatever, like however you want to figure out what you're doing, I kind of am okay with it. Like, I don't actually think that. Sometimes when I get frustrated, I try to imagine myself that life is a single player game and everyone else is an NPC, like a non-player character, which means that I have nothing, like I can't, what am I supposed to say? Like, can I mess with you? Like it just, why would I do that? Like, let me play me, like I'm me, right? And I think that's really good, because it helps me just realize that. But when somebody else does something that hurts other people, pollutes or anyway, I think then they're overstepping that line of like, you do you, but if you suddenly do something to other people, your circles are crossing now. Like, you have to be tolerant to other people now. You have to realize that you're now oppressing. And I think that I think is very tricky for me. And I think that I can actually get absurdly and very strangely sad when people when people are nasty to other people, or when actually people are nasty to dead objects and doesn't do anything about it. Like, I can get really, really sad when people like chop down a tree, or in the beginning of when Daesh like invaded Syria, they burned a library. No, it's older than that. They burned a library, and I was sitting with my wife and watching the news, and I just started crying like extraordinary. And my wife was like, "What? Oh yeah, it's a horrible." And I was like, "Why are they burning the library?" And my wife was like, well, "Yeah, I know that's horrible, but I realized that, I mean, like I like, and maybe it's like the fact that I like building these systems, these exponential building systems. Like if we created like institutions or wisdoms or knowledges or anything, if you just destroy them for destruction's sake because you're angry at something, I think that you're destroying the fibers of society. So I think that makes it really hard for me. So I think that the three pillars that constantly worry me are trust in institutions and each other, it's inequality, and it's climate change. And I think if you look at those three, I think that for me, it's really about like you crossing a boundary to another person. Like you don't actually, inequality is like a systemic problem of you not allowing people to be people. And like you think you're above other people. And I think there's a reason for that, because as they say, you know, if you're brought up in privilege, then equality looks like oppression. So like if you used to rule the world, if somebody says everybody should vote, like of course for you, what happened is they, like for all of the rest of us, like that they got up, but for you, what it feels like is you went down. So of course you get angry when people like put you down. You used to have 100% of the votes, now you have 50% of the votes. That's oppression. Somebody stole 50% of your votes. And I think that I can understand that, but that's again the problem that people, like we have to be like tolerant and realize that's not everybody's coming from that journey. Like I think one of my favorite exercises is like I do a lot of long distance running, and I think about it a lot of time when you do long distance running. It's like you always end up running both headwind and tailwind, whatever you do. Like it's impossible because you run really far, and it's funny because everybody knows that it's harder to run against the wind. Like you know that, like people running against wind, and it's like, oh my god, this is hard. But the funny fact, nobody knows that it's easier to run with the wind in your back. When you're running the wind in your back, you somehow can tell yourself that it isn't windy today. Every time this happens to me, I run and it's feel like it's not that windy. It's funny. And I run with my oldest kid. And like we run, it's super nice. And it's like, it's not that bad of a day. And then we turn and both of us like, holy shit, it's storming today. And that's like privilege is. Privilege is running with the wind in your back. You don't even see it though. Why do other people look so whiny in their faces? It's because they have the wind in their face. And I think that's like, I think it's really important to have that tolerance, but also then to realize that if you are in a privileged situation, if you're actually running with the wind in your back, you actually have to reach out and help other people. So I think that's like one of the things, and it's tricky because of course there's a boundary which you feel like, let me just be me. And to be very honest, it's also balance that I'm struggling with personally. I have times when I just wish I could just switch off everything, go and read one of my fiction books and not care about the world. But it's hard because I kind of feel that I want to be able to try to make stuff better. And it is actually a real struggle to actually turn off for me, to just tell myself like, okay, turn off everything, don't care about anything, read this book, play this game, hang out with the kids. But it's hard to do that when you feel like the world isn't really working.
Yeah, great points. Great points. Running with the wind in your back. And which leads back then to reading fiction books to develop empathy, because I think when people only experience how life feels when they have a lot of wind from the back and are pushed forward in life and privileged, it's really challenging to understand how life can look like when people are not privileged. The great points. Maybe we move to the entrepreneurial part of your journey. You have quite a journey and a very successful journey. Can you share some stories from your life as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I can share infinite amount of stories. I mean, but like I think that's the great part of being old is like you have a lot of great battle scars, and also the great part of like starting a company and not knowing how to do it is like you're like Aaron learning a lot. I think if you simplify the journey, it's like I started a company with 5 of my friends, and it was a very strange situation because we kind of started 3 companies together in one thing. So like I was in London working for a company doing computer arts in 1999. I didn't understand that it would year in 1999. So like, you know, the heyday of like the .com boom, everything, you can sell anything if it has the word tech in it. And I talked to one of my friends that we should start like an arts company. This is an amazing thing. And then randomly he met to somebody that became one of our first customers. We ended up like getting the huge, amazing opportunity to build a big arts installation in Stockholm. They were going to pay us 50,000 euros. It was just crazy. We realized that we need to invoice the 50,000 euros. So we need to start a company. And then 4 other friends were like, one of them was doing a movie, a student movie, and he's going to do special effects, and he needed kind of a company to invoice maybe. And then 2 other friends were doing consultancy for computer vision companies, so they kind of needed a company in a way. So we said, let's set up a company. So we set up a company in this way. You hear that, no business plan, just completely crazy that we did this together. I set up this company and started like invoicing left, right, and center. And we were all students. So like it was not like, it was like a part-time for everything and everybody. And we really love being our own bosses. And even if being our own bosses means you can work any 80 hours a week you want, it still means you can actually choose. And if you're, 19, 20, 21, that's actually extraordinary great. It's much better than having a boss and a conference room you have to book and so on and so forth. So it's great. And then what happened is that we kind of pivoted, strange enough, from this like arts thing and like the other things completely randomly. What happened was that Sony and Ericsson, the big, like two of the big mobile giants, merged and built this new company, Sony Ericsson. And Sony wanted a PlayStation phone. And if you remember your phone from 2000, it was like a microwave of an experience. It wasn't that amazing. And the PlayStation phones wouldn't really fit. And what happened completely randomly, and a friend of us said like, help, I'm drowning, this project's never going to work. And we kind of built a prototype over the weekend. I think that none of us wanted to do it. We kind of built this so that we kind of be nice to our friends so we could get rid of this thing to just show them it's not that hard. We kind of built this thing and very opportunistically, and they came over and they said, can we license it from you? And I think we were all like, oh, no, we don't want to work with mobile phones. It's horrible. It's boring. It's like this small, right? So we were like, yeah, you'd have to pay us like 50,000 euros. Because that, that was the largest amount we've ever heard. So if you say that, then of course the people from Sony and Ericsson will be like, oh, okay. But of course, if in the corporate world, 50,000 euros is nothing, right? So they were just like, do you mean per phone model? Or what do you mean? We were like, yeah. Oh my God. So then they kind of came back and said, let's do this. And we started realizing that, okay, all this art stuff we did and all these things, we didn't really pay anything, right? So why not actually do something that paid so we can spend all the rest of the time doing really fun stuff that we really enjoyed? And then suddenly I think there was like almost like, I think none of us are religious, but it came like this Lutheran feeling of like, we're doing something that we're good at. It was like ikigai, as like the Japanese would say it. Like we do something that we're good at, that the customer appreciates. And like, it was like one of those things that, and like we learned a lot. There were so many like ikigai aspects of it. And we just like felt that this was like way better than doing the things that we felt that, they didn't really appreciate, or that we felt like we're overstretching, or like we didn't really actually feel the real value in society. And so the company just pivoted into only doing this, and then scaled from the 6 friends to 180 people, with offices in Tokyo and Taipei and Seoul and Chicago and San Francisco and 2 in Sweden, and just scaled and scaled and scaled. And I think one of the funniest aspects of this, for me at least, was that we didn't have any venture money, so we just scaled this company. But that also meant that we didn't have any kind of real mentors. And kind of what I told you, like we're in this 300,000 people city where like they're not like, that wasn't at all a thriving startup scene. Now there actually are quite a lot of startups. But that meant the advice we got were like from, people who had built these, cement companies almost kind of style, right? So we end up inventing so many things. One day we invented a business card, which was the greatest thing ever. So what happened is that one of my colleagues, one of my co-founders, was called, and he picked up the phone and they said, hey, I'm calling from billings, like invoicing procurement from Sony Ericsson. I got this invoice and it's 8 items and we're supposed to pay you like 2,000 euros. But it seems like it's 2,000 euros for all 8. Or is it per item? And he was like, no, it's 2,000 euros for all. And the person was like, okay, thank you very much. And then he hung up. And then he explained it to the rest of us. And like, why? Like, obviously we can't have lied, right? But it's like, you're the worst business person on the planet. Why didn't you even say, oh, it's wrong, let me send an updated invoice? And we could have charged them more, because they didn't even care, right? And he was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't talk to customers. And we were like, no, you should not. How do we solve this? How do we give somebody something that says, don't call him? Oh, we should give them something that says, call me. And it's like, yeah, how do that? And like, oh, we'll make a card that says like my name and my phone number and like, customers. No, it's not called customers. Business. So we made like cards that said like business and like handed it to people, and like technology when it's like other co-founders. And it was so great because then they called the right person. And we were just like, this is genius. And like, business cards, right? Like, it's just like people knew. But it's so funny that we were so elated that we thought we invented something huge. And we had, I think at this first company, I think we invented, air quotes on that one, 10 things that we were like, this is amazing. And most people like, it's called an advisory board. Like, okay, so, but it was really good. There are many of those crazy, strange stories.
So basically you started without any experience in running companies, and you discovered everything yourself.
Yeah, exactly. The best part was when we started asking one dude for advice on how to do just bookkeeping. Another student, we were like, how do we do bookkeeping? And this guy had done his bachelor thesis and then his master thesis on like small, medium-sized company bookkeeping or something. And we're like, oh, he's a genius. Like, bought him beers and brought him over and like we showed him the books and like, how do we do this? And he was like, this is debit, this is credit. And we're like, oh shit, he's a magician, right? And then he just looked at it and he just looked up and said, guys, you're never gonna get this. Like, you're never gonna understand it. And we're like, we're trying. And he said, can I just join you? And like, can I just work part-time for you and figure this out? And we're like, are you serious? Would you do this for us? He was like, yeah. Like, I was happy to help you, right? And it was like, and we were like, oh, we hired a magician. And it's like amazing. And he was like, walked out of the room. We're like, fuck yes, I got hired, right? And we were just like, this is the best. Like, he's happy, we're happy. And he then became our CFO. And it's crazy. Like, we just thought it was a genius we hired. But of course, like, it was just because we were completely incompetent. Like, 4 of us were computer science majors. And I think that, like, if it was about coding, we were all like super interested in it. But if it's not about coding, we were like, oh my God. And then one was an architect and one was in film. So like, none of us were into business whatsoever.
There are 2 great points that I would like to explore a little bit deeper with you. You mentioned that you founded your company after you had your first significant customer. How did you
more or less, yeah.
How did you find your customer?
I think in this case, it was like a very classical way of finding enterprise customers. What happened was that one of my friends had been at in London where I were, and we had talked about when I was his arts company, and we had talked about it and jammed about this. We actually made a little demo thing of how to like present to people how they made these lobbies of their big buildings, kind of things. We could build them for them, technology, blah, blah, blah. And then he was going to an arts festival thingamajiggy in Finland with a lot of our like other friends. And he was on a ferry, fairly drunk. And one of the people on this ferry was another random person who was like, in the same kind of car van parade to Helsinki. And this guy started bragging about his mom, who had this big arts exhibition in Stockholm. She's a very famous arts journalist, science journalist. And then Ludwig, my friend, was a bit like, we're doing arts and we're doing this arts company, like 2 drunk men on like, a big ferry. And then they were there like out cocking each other more or less, like, talking about how this thing. And then the other guy was telling Ludwig, my friend, it's like, you should talk to my mom. It's just like, yeah, absolutely, blah, blah. And when they both sobered up in Finland, they were like, I'll do the intro to my mom. Because of course, both remembered it was like, I don't remember the conversation, but it was something, you were a genius. So let's figure this out. And then, so then it's like we had a meeting with this super famous science journalist, and she knows her shit, and she would not put up with a 20-year-old dude who comes in and talks bullshit. So there was 0 chance in hell that we would sign this. We didn't know this. But what happened was like this meeting was set up in Stockholm, and I was flying there, and I was reading Gödel, Escher, Bach at that moment, which is a book about recursiveness in philosophy and arts. Escher being a very like recursive artist. And what I didn't know was Escher was her favorite artist in the world. As a science journalist, she was like very interested in it. So when she came into this cafe, you think about this kind of woman who's like tight-lipped, angry at like teenage boys who like ruin the world kind of level. She comes in and like she looks at the book and she's like softens up a bit, but then she says like, "What do you think about Escher?" Because she knows that I'm going to bullshit the shit out of this, right? And because like my mind goes everywhere and like podcast and books and whatever, right? Like I essentially saying like, yeah, this is what I think, and just sits down. We order coffee. We start talking. At the end of our conversations, she starts talking about mind and consciousness, which I'm also super into, and the book is a bit into. And she said, like, yeah, I'd really like you to build this arts exhibition because it's really about the intersection of what we just talked about. And I was like, oh. And I hadn't like showed the demos or anything. Like I prepped all these things, like the very techie, like 20-year-old dude demos. And she was like, no, I really like the way you're thinking here. I'd love you to do it. And it's a 50,000 euro what I don't remember what it's called anymore in arts, but it was like a stipend or whatever it's called. So like, honorarium. It was a 50,000 euro honorarium. So I was like, okay, but then preferably would invoice that because it's easier for us then. And I was like, okay, thank you very much. This is amazing. And she was like, yeah, I have to leave now. Thank you very much, but get back to me. And like, she walked out and I picked up the phone and called my friend. I think that she just said that we would get 50,000 euros. He was like, what? I don't know. She said like honorarium. And he was like, Wikipedia checked it, right? And like, seems like we just send them. Yeah, I don't know. It like seems like we get the cash, right? So like very, very randomly.
What's your background? Is it computer science? And
yes.
how does that play into organizing art exhibitions?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, and it was actually we actually built an arts piece. So we built a big interactive arts piece. We actually built in this arts exhibition, the whole thing was about mind and consciousness. It was about new discoveries about like essentially fluid consciousness and a really interesting, this is 2001. It's an Italian researcher that had made quite groundbreaking thoughts about how emotions affect and rewire consciousness and therefore brains in an interesting way. Damasio is his name. Antonio Damasio. And so we were supposed to build, like, she asked, like, when we talked about this, she said, like, what could we do? And we had talked a bit about, me and the other co-founders, we talked a bit, maybe we could do like a way where you walk into a room and it would track where you were in the room with cameras, and you could see where you walked, and you kind of affected how a screen showed you what the main character thought of. And we kind of, sparred this super famous art journalist, and I like sparred a bit about what she would feel about this. And she, of course, like, being a mature person, she had like good ideas of like how to hone it in. And because we were techies, we had, of course, great ideas about what was possible. And then when we came up and started building this, there were so many other like arts people building stuff. It was a massive place. So like one of the professors of free art in Sweden, Maria Miesenberger at the time, she was an extraordinary artist, like, really like artist distilled. And she kind of said a couple of things like, oh, I would love the glass to be half translucent. We're like, oh, that's so smart. Wow, whoa. And like another person was like, so like they all said stuff to us, and like we kind of took it in, and we're like, oh, interesting, maybe we should do this, and like, try to move it around, because in our world, technology could do anything, right? But then what do you use it for? So just listening in and hearing other people's advice and building our piece. So it was very nice. And then we built this thing, and it actually was super popular for the whole exhibition. It was really, really big because, of course, it was interactive. It was not that complicated. A lot of these things were very kind of deep about consciousness, and ours was very playful and nice and like music and stuff. So there were a lot of like high school classes that came, and they walked into it, and they came out, and we were one person at the entrance, one person exit of this extraordinary large room with dynamic music and videos and everything that moved. And it looked like you walked around in somebody's mind, more or less. So the funny thing is, people came out on the other end and they said, I realized that the whole system like understood that I was sad, and I projected sadness onto the main character. And like, how did you know I was sad? And it was like, the true answer is like, it randomizes a feeling when a person walks into the room. And it's the same trick system that we back in the day when we were in military service tracked airplanes. So like we just like, it's an airplane tracking system that randomizes an emotion for you. So like, but that was not we couldn't say that, of course. Then we would have ruined the whole illusion for people. So like, can't really tell you, but of course. And people are like, oh, it's so amazing. I felt so recognized that it really saw how I felt. And I was like, thank you very much. This was an extraordinary experience. And we're like, thank you. And we're like, shit, how do we live up to this? So yeah.
So you did one exhibition. This was your first customer, then decided to found the company.
We founded the company when we got the deal, because we had to invoice them, right? Like the business plan was invoice them and buy computers and deduct VAT. That was the business plan.
So basically, your business plan was send out the first an invoice, and for that
we were three invoices, right? Like one to the computer vision company, one to the student film, and one to this. So like it was like, do these things together, see what happens. And then what happened is like we just got a lot of people who asked us questions, and because we were students, we were like, oh, I'd love to do that. That sounds fun. And then in the middle of nowhere, this like thing with Sony and Ericsson happened, and they were like, can you do this? And we treated it as everything else. We treated it, I think, with sincerity and seriousness, in the sense that we were like, oh, let's prepare and let's be nice to them and everything, and let's see where this goes.
How did you get this Sony Ericsson deal? What was the focus of this project?
So the problem they had was that they tried to get these color screen phones to kind of, like the headache is essentially, if you take a microwave oven today and you would take it apart and you would take the screen and you would say, I want this to like, have nice graphics on it. The problem is, if you did, it would be so slow, because it's built to draw a certain amount of pixels on the screen. And what happens when you change the screen to like a nicer screen with more colors and more pixels, the problem is like the hose that goes into the screen is supposed to push the colors and the description of it. That necessarily is not very much bigger. So the problem is like you had like the screen was great to show a still image, but not to change quickly, because the things that came through the pipe were too slow. So like, and that was like very much like when we were kids, we had built, we'd built a lot of like stuff for tiny computers and stuff as hobbies, and competed and like done stuff as like just fun stuff. So like for us, it was like, okay, interesting. How do we tell the screen that it's going to update? Maybe we can only tell parts of the screen. Maybe we can tell it like, and trick the eye that it does this first and that, and like it saves and the observer would think that it happened, but of course it didn't really until slightly later, but you don't really see that. So it was a lot of like understanding like the technology's limits, but also kind of what we could do. There are a lot of people that did that back in the day, where like you took an old computer and you wanted to play music that wasn't possible to get out of that computer, like the audio card, but you did it because you realized that there were like stuff that happened when you did certain things. And some of these things were even like if you played certain tones, the box of the computer vibrated. And then you can already get bass and stuff. So like if you didn't touch the keyboard of your computer, you can actually get other sounds out of it. So some people make music that like click play, but then don't touch the computer, because then it actually sounds better because it actually used the vibration of the computer and stuff like that. So it's very much like that mindset of that we just have to work with this very, very limited thing we have, and like try to get it to look good. And I think the nice thing is that when you're working in an environment like automotive or mobile phones, inners, the thing is that there's a very rigorous like testing system and like everything. So like if you do a web page today or then, if you did it and it crashed, like you're like, oh my God, I'm really sorry, it crashed. If you're in a mobile phone or an automotive, like if you're in the factory, you do a thing and it crashes, like, yeah, it's 9 months till you ever get to see the road anyway, so like you can keep iterating, which meant that we could just like throw stuff in and try to fix it. And oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's think through this. And even like transporting the code from a computer to actually a mobile phone could take like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, which meant you sat there and thought for a long time and thought, okay, I think this will work. Flash this to this thing. And then you're like, okay, now I'll go and do something else, which meant that we thought about it a lot more, which created a whole different mindset, right? So like, it was very interesting. And I think it was, in that sense, it was safe. It was slow, but it was safe.
We are still late 90s with the Sony Ericsson project, or
2001. 2001.
Yeah.
And then we scaled the company 2001 to 2002. Like that was like the arts project were 2001, 2002. And then the Sony Ericsson were like 2002, 2003. And then we met Samsung, I think 04, I think 03, 04. And then Samsung was like, we're building like a new phone model every month. It's really like speed to market. And it suited our personality of being like, 21, 25-year-olds a lot more than the very thoughtful. And we had like, because we'd already done like the fire test of being with Sony Ericsson, we have actually developed like a lot of like good tech that allowed it to work. And then when it came to Samsung's like whole motto was like speed. It was really like a fear of being late on everything, which was amazing for us. So we were just throwing questions like, do you want to build this new phone that goes to like northern China? Do you want to do this phone that goes to Thailand? Do you want to do this phone for Verizon in the US? And we just like tried grabbing stuff and just hired every single smart person we knew and tried to fix it. And it was like this constant like, craziness, and like build teams in parts of the world, and started meeting all kinds of customers in the whole value chain of how a phone is made, to like figure out, can we get more processing power? Can we get more memory? Can we get better screens? What can we do? Essentially because our customers said, like, it was this strange kind of era which always happens, I guess, but the kind of top 10 companies were hyper competitive. Like they were all trying to win against each other, but it was still a market, so that Motorola and Samsung and Sony Ericsson and Nokia, whatever, they couldn't ban us from working with competition, but they were like striving to be the best. So like we were like a strange situation, and like I think it's a very unapt and unmodern comparison, but we were like strange enough, like an arms dealer in a war, that we were just like, oh, tell what your needs are and we can build better guns so that you beat our guns in another battle, because you're going to meet us later there, right? And it was really like amazing for us because these companies stretched us and forced us to think about, okay, these people now have better planes. Now you build better radars. Oh my God, what will better radars be? And it was really good for us to kind of think about what happens when this phone goes out in the US. Then, of course, Motorola is going to look like an idiot. And the reason it really worked competitively as well is that the top 5, 6, 7, 8 players, they had so different philosophies, so that we weren't like breaking any legalities. Like Motorola could never do what Samsung did, and Samsung could never do what Sony did, and so on and so forth. So we always had to adapt and be like, what's the Motorola way of doing this? Like, like if Motorola says we want to do this, what do they mean? Because they don't mean the same thing as Samsung says. Samsung would say, can we release it in 10 days? Motorola wants to build like an infrastructure that they can mean that they win long term. And Nokia wants independence. Like they don't care who we are, but they want to be able to get rid of us any day. So like we always had to like look at them, and then we took like the most demands from each. It's like Samsung is not dumb. They don't want to be dependent on us either. So can we make a thing that makes them comfortable? Not as comfortable as Nokia, because of course Nokia has extremely rigor, but like how can we take the rigor that Nokia wants and like help Samsung feel more comfortable? How can we take the long-termness that Motorola wants? How can we do this to them? So like we had to be all, which was really, really good for us. So we had to like learn a lot.
So you basically worked for all big handset companies back then.
Yeah, more or less, exactly. We end up like designing Android for Google. So like we end up even building the one that tried to beat everything. It was really, really strange. Like we
just for context, these were the days of PayPal, Google was really early, also
Yeah.
back in the days. You
Apple
started
came
19.
along, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Like we
What
started 2001, and then the company got acquired by BlackBerry in 2010. So one day
many
it was
many
like
years?
BlackBerry called us and said, "Hey, we want to acquire you," and we were just like, "Sure, this is going to be just like any customer," because this has happened before that our customer said, "We want to acquire you," but then they saw the massive monster of a company we were on Hydra, and they were like, "Oh, can't acquire this beast of a company with offices and mess and everything." So we just thought, "Okay, let's go there and let's explain what we do," and then they're going to be licensee. And then after that meeting, they were like, "No, we want to acquire you." So we were
What
like,
I
"What?" So it was very strange.
what I found quite interesting in the mobile industry back then, I mean 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I mean the market was shrinking. I think the best times for the mobile industry was in the 90s.
Yeah.
I got, I think, for free 4 or 5 handsets per person. Austria, so it's was great to use these tools. And in 2003, 4, and 5, the market was already shrinking. I mean, I had a lot of mobile
Mm,
phones at home, so why should I buy another one?
yeah.
And I think the market saturation was about over 100%, something
Yes.
like this.
Truly.
Um, what did the industry miss? Because my expectation was, okay, probably some will go out of business, like BlackBerry, but the big names like Nokia, Sony, Ericsson, one will remain. And suddenly Apple came along. Uh,
Yeah.
what was this turning point? What did the entire mobile industry miss in your opinion?
I think there were many things. I think that one of the things is I think that almost every single company, they were, it was strange enough a competitive but also non-competitive market. So like it was very strange. It was way more of like medieval marriages than it was anything else. So it was like not a true market. So like if you take like, Vodafone came out and like, so there was very carrier dominated, like the Vodafones and Verizons of the world that more or less ran the market. If you look at Japan, it was even more like a Docomo. They designed the phones in many aspects. And then so you had this tension between those, like the Verizons, the Vodafones, and the Docomo, and then the mobile manufacturer from underneath who didn't want to just be degraded to unknown. And like nowadays, people, I mean, if you look at the car industry, people go out and buy a Ford or a Volkswagen, right? People don't go out and buy a car from car leasing company. So people actually have a relationship with a car. Whereas in the mobile phone world, many parts of the world, people actually, in the US, people in Japan, people bought a Verizon phone. And they didn't actually, the only way to figure out what phone it was, like you looked at the battery and saw, oh, it's a Samsung phone. So it was like a very strange world where this was, and the thing that what happened there was like on one end, the carriers pushed down the market and wanted the cheapest price and didn't really care about anything because they just wanted to send bits over the line. And then on the other end, you had like a lot of pride in like the Blackberries and the Nokias and the Sonys who came with like, hey, we can do stuff and innovate. And actually people really underestimate that Nokia was like one of the absolutely biggest ones, and the market really expanded actually in a lot of APAC, in a lot of the BRICS countries, so like in Brazil, India, China, and a lot of the emerging markets and the African continent, they actually sold quite a lot of phones, and they actually made quite a lot of money. But of course, in Europe or like it was oversaturated. So like there was strange tension battle, and then there were a lot of like these strange medieval marriages between like how these deals got made, which was very, very, very hard for innovation to actually happen. And then the other thing is like it was a very slow industry because it took like 18 months to build a phone, like the automotive industry is today. And then it was a very IP-centric industry with a lot of patents, which means that so you have a secret industry, like a very like secretive industry, people don't really be able to talk to each other, so no collaboration essentially. And then you have like a very slow industry, which makes it really scary to tell anybody anything, of course, but it also means that you kind of have to, you take a lot of cost and it comes later. And then you have like a very kind of feudal lord pressure from above of how you build stuff. So innovation is essentially just a waste of money. So all of the companies that innovated were people who had like extremely strong founders that still run the company for some way. So like Nokia did a lot of innovation because I think they were very, very proud Finnish of how they did stuff, which meant like they were like, we're not going to be beaten by other countries for God's sake. And I mean, Samsung did this because the actual Samsung leadership was very visionary. It was one of the most visionary companies. And the same with BlackBerry. They were like extraordinary visionary because it was founders who still ran the company. And if you look at a lot of the other companies, they kind of flip-flop between trying to like please carriers a bit, but also try to innovate a bit. And I think that became like, it was very hard for them to do stuff. And I think that like Apple was very, very, like Apple came in and just said F you to everybody and said like, we don't even
Yeah.
care about which carrot it is, right? And I think it was extremely lucky that it worked because like it was a very uninnovative market. And it was like truly uninnovative in many aspects. It was very irritating, I think. I think if you look at your phone from 2005, 6, 7, the cameras got slightly better, But the other thing is that they just got more and more buttons, because the buttons could just do more and more. And it becomes the CEOs and the CTOs of these companies had decided that screens are brittle and they will never work because they will just break, right? Which means that the only way to interact with all the features that came into your phone was just add another button, which is a very unhuman-centric way of looking at it. So they were like techno-economical build entities, these companies. They were run by like economists and engineers that try to like build a better phone, and none of them thinking about like behavior or customer. And I think actually BlackBerry did. Like BlackBerry were extremely centric to CIOs, like chief information officers at corporates. They were really thinking about like what's security, what's the use case, how do you read your email. And I think that in the West, or like we in Europe, we really underappreciate how extraordinarily dominant BlackBerry was at actually thinking like this. But then Apple came along, of course, and they thought super customer-centric and really thinking that cut the bullshit and back to the basics, what can we build? And then one of the biggest demises, I would say, that came after, like 2008 to 2010, was actually that most manufacturers were trying to out-Apple Apple. That instead of like thinking about, okay, Apple just did this screen, this is really smart, okay, I get it. How do we think about what is the Motorola way of doing this? Like what would we, if we are true to ourselves, what would we do? Or BlackBerry, like what do we do? And I think there was this conversation like internally at BlackBerry, which when we got acquired, actually, Michael Lazaridis, the CEO and one of the founders, who's an absolute genius, absolutely amazing person, he said like when they offered us to acquire us, like he said, what Steve Jobs has offered the world is to waste you an hour every day in a great way. I'm offering to save you an hour every day so you can spend it however you want. And it was truly true. Like if you looked at the BlackBerry phone in 2009, like you used it and you're like, oh my God, this is so efficient. Like it's actually really good. And if you look at the iPhone in like 07, 08, 09, it was like a bit of a toy. It was very brittle. But what people underestimated is that if you make many of one thing, the unit economics goes on so drastically and so much innovation. So I think that when you came with that mindset, and what was interesting, if like then you come into like the modern mindset, again, out of the long sales cycle and secrecy, and Apple is a highly secret company, but they're in a place where people are like, you know, super promiscuous with information. So like, I mean, Apple and Google, so many people talked between them. So Google kind of knew what Apple's doing and back and forth. So they were like in this strange kind of symbiosis co-opetition situation. So kind of Android was kind of designed to kind of like try to make sure that Google weren't like Apple didn't win the mobile market and took like the browser away from Google, right? And like Google wanted to get the browser in the window there. And I think that, and then you had Microsoft, and Microsoft was back then like the latecomer to the industry. They were like the infrastructure on-premise player who thought that you sell on-premise and that's what you do. And then all these kind of quote unquote cloud players came in. And I mean, Apple's leadership were not modernized, like very kind of parochial in the way they thought about the world, and they were the winners. And the reason that BlackBerry would say demise was that they thought they were winners. So like it's the classical thing is like one of the reasons I do love startups is because that when you're ever working on somebody who thought they already won, that's when you actually can beat them up quite a lot. So I think that you know the complacency there is strong, and also like just like the superiority and the belief of that you don't need to innovate. And I think it's an always reminder that I think there are three ways of doing this, like product excellence, customer intimacy, and operational excellence. And I think like if you have like the best product, you will win a lot. But the thing is that you can always have new people coming in with operational excellence and just making it cheaper and easier, right, to do it. Or you can come in and being tighter to the customer and solving their problems like better, right? And as anybody who's winning, you need to be paranoid about all three. You need to be like, how are we closer to the customer? But the problem is like every time you're closer to the customer, you're wasting your time away from operational excellence. Like McDonald's being one of the most operational excellent companies in the world. Like you go into McDonald's almost anywhere in the world, 90% of the menu is the same, 10% is unique. And like you come in and like, you know, they serve it the same way, the same fryers, they hire the same people the same way. 10% is like, if you go to, you know, Taipei, they have like very, very unique burgers that you would like as an Austrian be like, whoa. And like the same thing if you go to Sweden, you'd be like, what's this burger? Like what's happening here? And I think it's really good because that's the way that McDonald's is able to kind of explore and exploit. They're able to exploit the fact they're super efficient, but they need to like figure out maybe this is the new burger we need, right? And this is the thing that makes you feel the intimacy over the small local burger shop that has like a very unique flavor. And then product excellence, when you get to that size, you can start saying, we want alt meats. We want the best alt meats. Like we want these new pea protein burger, and it needs to be the best one. And we can actually buy large volumes. The problem when you get to that scale is that you usually don't want innovation, because innovation is a distraction, is a cost. And I think about that a lot. It's like there are four kind of stages of leadership. Like you have the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the leaders, and the managers. And the innovators are the people who come up with a new thing, and they're like, oh my God. And then they put it in their desk drawer, or they write a new song and they're like, this is amazing, and they're happy with it. And entrepreneurs are the ones that they want to like burn the old so they can introduce the new, and they don't care what it is. Like if an innovator gives, they're like, oh, I'm gonna make bottles. That's what I'm gonna make. These can sell, right? Like burn the old and make the new. So innovators and entrepreneurs really interact with each other really well. They love each other. And then you have leaders, and leaders are the ones that like they gather people around the campfire and they want a purpose and they want us all to work on something together. And they work really greatly with entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs, they're like, we have this cause, we're going to save the planet or fix bottles, whatever. And leaders are like, oh, that's great. Let's rally around this, right? And entrepreneurs love leaders because somebody in the team says, oh, I'm going on parental leave. And like, oh, the cause is so important, right? Like you can't leave now. And the leader is like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like Jens needs to go on parental leave for a bit. He's going to come back, leave him alone now. And then the next step is managers. And managers are like these massive like harvesters, like improve a metric like 3% every month. And for them, people are full-time equivalents, like FTEs. So managers love leaders because they're like, can you get it more efficient and talk to the populace, whatever we call them now, colleagues, co-workers, whatever is the word of the day that we use for these minions that we have, right? And leaders, for some strange reason, admire managers because they think that eventually, career-wise, they will get to be managers and sit in a corner office and get a higher salary. So somehow this chain, everybody talks to each other. And typically what happens in a company is started by innovators and entrepreneurs. They build a company and they try to hire people that are leaders, or maybe they have some leader gene in them that they were Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or something, and they kind of figure it out. And then eventually start hiring managers. And the thing that's a curse of the company is when the board looks at the company and they feel that the people running the company are like playing shop too much and being too innovative and don't send out the quarterly reports at the right time. So then they ask the CFO, who's like the only grown-up in the room, they ask him or her, can you maybe be the CEO along with the CEO, co-CEO maybe, and like whatever, and then take over the CEO role? And he or she takes over that role. And the original founder is like super happy because they can just work with innovation and like work with the new stuff and set up new markets and turn stuff on fire. But then the board eventually says, this is just so much cost, this department. Can't you move the innovators into taking patents? Just get them to do a lot of patents so we can sue people and like, have a lot of like defense. And all the entrepreneurs, get rid of them because they're just creating so much mess for us. It's hard to figure out what they do. Everything they send is really hard to read. So then the manager is now firing the original entrepreneurs and they leave and they're like, I'll start something new. And that's why a lot of companies get this like flattened out S-curve where they start really, and then they go like this because the entrepreneurs are gone.
I love your storytelling. It's great. It's great listening to you. I mean, this is the reason what you mentioned why I find Apple so interesting, because it seems that Apple, despite its size they've reached, they are still innovative. In your opinion, what's the secret sauce of a company like Apple? Why does Apple not die like all other companies, so that they don't push out the innovators and entrepreneurs and just get stuck in the structures and then make place for something new? Why has Apple since, I think, say 2001, this endless home run?
Yeah, I think it's the fascinating thing is like the thing that I find most fascinating is like if you take two companies that are just so close to each other and so different. Take Google and Apple. I mean, they're the most opposing cultures you can almost ever be in. Like, it's so strange. Like, I mean, Google is it's a dorm room of PhDs kind of level. You come in and like, you're like, oh my God. You just be like, holy shit. Like everybody's like, does anybody do anything normally here? Like, you really have a term navigating it. And there's, of course, one department at Google, which is just a cash cow. That is like the ads business. But they allow, like, do you want to build self-driving cars and nuclear reactors? Yeah, you were one of the core members of the ad team. Go ahead. Here's 20 million euros, like dollars. Like, go ahead and try it for a year, right? Which is funny because it's crazy to think about that culture has succeeded, create a lot of innovation. But Google is still like in an ads business, right? At its core, right? They created so much value. Like if you actually think about it, Google has created so much like human value, like extraordinary amount of human value. But like they still only more or less make money from ads, right? Like they cloud business and stuff. There's something else, but they like at the end of the day, they really do that, right? And then you take Apple, which is like this monolithic like way of thinking, like DIY, like we do it on our own, we like don't collaborate, like there's secrets like crazy, right? And Apple has opened up, it's become less of a secret company. But Apple back in 2007, I mean, by God, like, it was not like everybody was afraid of Apple, like in so many shapes and forms, right? Where Google was this kind of like colorful, kind of clownish kind of thing that people have a hard time figuring out what they were going to do. Oh, they're going to do a spaceship maybe. Where Apple is like, you know that if Apple comes out with it, it's actually going to work. And I think what made Apple successful, I think that first of all, I think that of course you could just put Steve Jobs on a pedestal and he's a genius, da, da, da. I think what it all boiled down to is like, funny enough, a pride. I think that like if you take like why BlackBerry was amazing, and I think why Apple was amazing, or like why Samsung were amazing, or many of these companies, it was because the leadership had an inherent pride of what they did. They were like, they loved their craft, and they would not let shit get out the door. And I think it's really fascinating because I think that that's also like a startup mentality, like the entrepreneurs that started their company that really like doing this, really like solving the problem. Some of them are craftspeople that want to like do it the best way, but some of them want to solve the problem the best way. And they don't care about the tech, but they really care about the customer or something. They have this pride of like, I need to kind of undo the wrong, right? I need to like put a dent in the universe, what do you want to call it? Like, I like want to leave a trace that really works. And if you have that attitude, you're never going to like just sell a mediocre burger and hope nobody, like just hope they don't realize, right? Like if you were a vegetarian back in, I don't know how late, let's see, what year is it now? Like, let's say 2010, 2015 even. Go into McDonald's and eat, like buy a vegetarian burger at McDonald's. It was like the most extraordinary shit. It was like deep fried peas that like literally like peas, like whole peas, not like mushroom, like peas and other vegetables, put in a patty and just put in the deep fryer and you pick it up. And it's just like, it was like the strangest thing. And it was like a checkbox. It was like, some people want vegetarian food. Let's just get them something, right? And it's so strange because like if you are a company with pride, like if you were a BlackBerry or you were like or an Apple, like you would be like, let's have management taste the burger. The management would taste the burger and say, I wouldn't eat them. Then Apple wouldn't serve them. They'd be like, I'm not going to serve this burger. But if you take like a lot of other companies, they were like, yeah, management, they didn't really try the burger, but they're not vegetarians, so they don't really care. But it's like, what? And I think that pride was their strength and is their strength. I think they see a lot of pride. And I think the headache is when that pride like becomes like, you're not open. Like you essentially think that you know it all. And I think what's really fascinating is like Apple was extremely paranoid and is extremely paranoid, right? And I think that paranoia and pride is like such a good combo. Like you never think you're winning. I think you always think you're the underdog. And even like I think I don't know about Apple now. It's a long time since I acted with Apple now, but I find it fascinating to think. I think that a lot of people, I don't know actually. It's an interesting question. I wonder if Apple still thinks they're the underdog. And I think usually the transition you can do when you stop becoming the underdog is actually taking on a much bigger cause. That you take on like the, as the US does like the world police stuff. And like, I mean, it's like you just be like, oh, okay, we're the grown-ups, we have to do this. And I think Apple has done this last 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? We're like, their environment, sustainability, we're like, okay, we'll have to do the pledge, we have to go further than anyone else. And I think that allows you to just go further. And I think the fascinating thing is like many of these causes, pick any cause, like pick diversity, which Apple has been really big on for many years. And I think actually, even before most people knew that Tim Cook was gay, I think that they were already very, very open about diversity. And I think that, of course, allows you to hire top talent because you have an open mindset. And I think that what's interesting about it is that Apple also has a non-accepted culture of like producing bullshit, which means that everybody can come in, but we're going to talk about this every shape or form. And I think that that's when you get like some of the interesting things about diversity. It's like diversity is so good because if you know the task, you know exactly what you're going to do. If you're going to build a plank when you're going to put in nails at a certain height, you can just build a robot and just allow it to do it. Because like you need zero diversity. Like you just do it the best way and get that out of the way as quickly as possible. If you need different kind of thinking, you need essentially arrows pointing in different directions. So the more innovative industry you are in, the more like differences you need to actually like approach this problem. But then also, of course, you actually need a way of channeling these things into something. You can't have a situation where you just like talk all the time. You have to like, okay, we have to ship a product in 9 months, right? So I think Apple mastered that back in the day as well. It's like we allow any kind of like, Steve Jobs' old adage was, do you want to be in the Navy or do you want to be a pirate? Like Apple recruited diversity people. Like they recruited like the homebrew association kind of people, like the very, very different people, right? But they distilled it down to like, we need to ship like an Apple II. It doesn't matter what you're thinking. We're going to fix this problem. And I think that is such a great power that you're kind of paranoid and you allow anything, but you also said, but we will ship Like, we will ship this thing.
You transitioned then from being an entrepreneur towards becoming a venture capitalist. From the stories that you told, especially about Apple and the mobile industry, what are you looking for when you talk to founders these days? What would you like to see as a VC?
I think it's a great question. I think that I just talked to like a friend that I'm somebody I know thanks to co-investing with them. We're in a board together, and we just talked about this morning, actually, exactly that. And I think it's funny because if you take Heidi Ewell and myself, like the three co-founders of Pebble, we actually look for very different things. So like there's a clear overlap between us that 60% is probably the same, where we look for exactly the same things. But there's 40%, which like it's so different. And we actually have a funny thing where like some of us meets a company and we're like, I like it, I don't love it, but I think that Heidi will like this. I think she will truly love it. Or like you will or something. So it's funny that like, what is it that we like? And I think it's different. I think that for me, I think that all three of us, I think it's, which I think is different from a lot of VCs necessarily. I think that we really like trust. Like for us, it's like we want the being able to build a relationship where we can kind of comment on what we think is our blind spots or give advice, and really being able to be like, what do you think about this, and what's going on in your life that makes this happen, and why actually are you doing this? Like, are you doing this to kind of, you want to make money, or do you want to do this because you want to solve the problem, or who do you want to recruit in your team? And having that conversation, like being able to build a relationship with somebody as a person, like not as an entrepreneur, not as a VC, not as a board member, not as a CEO, but actually, like I want actually you to trust me, and I want to be able to, like, I want this to be mutual. Like I want to have a situation where like I want to have it, like we're going to work together for 10 years maybe. Like I actually really want to know you. Like otherwise it's not that fun. So that is a very, very core factor of how we actually think about people. But then I think the other thing is that you need to kind of be in venture. The thing that most people don't really think about is the fact that when you're a pension fund and you're trying to save money, you're placing most of your money as a pension fund in like, you have like essentially three buckets. You put one bucket, you put in stock markets because they've always like, performed really nicely. And then you put one bucket in different kind of interest rates and bond instruments that are like, stabilizing. If one goes up, one goes down. These two together, you kind of like, take your risk reward ratio kind of level. But then like to be able to give your beneficiaries, like the people who have the pension, to give them money in like 5, 10, 20 years, you have to have something which is out there. Like you have to take risk to get reward. And typically what you do is like you take a small slice, and like some people take 1%, some people take like 30%. Like you take a certain number of all your money if you're one of these big organizations like endowment or pension funds, and you place it in different kind of alternatives like that are outside these two. And one of them is venture. So if you think about it, our job is to do something which is on the like the setup is that we have to be way better than the public market. Like if it's the same as public market, we're really, really bad, because the public market is liquid. You can just buy and sell all the time. So the way to think about it is that the public market is like one night stands. You're just like, okay, I want to meet somebody tonight, or whatever, speed dating. The thing is, we're a long-term marriage. So like, if we invest in somebody, we can't, like, it's easier to get a divorce than getting out of a founder investor relationship. So like you have to find stuff that are like truly worth the time. Otherwise you're married to the wrong person. And it has to be way more worth than like all of the 20 one-night stands you could have had during the time period, or how many one-night stands one person can have. So I think that's the complexity here, is that how do you do that? And the way to think about it is that the world is like, it's like, as any of these, it's a power law curve. So like, I don't know who's the number one artist in the world right now, but let's say it's Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has twice as many albums as Justin Bieber, probably not number 1 or 2 at all anymore. And then it just goes down and down. And like, Adele is like the third. And like, these are just like half. And eventually get down to the long tail, which is like, extraordinarily solid people. Like they're extraordinary people. But on the power law curve, the best ones are so much better, or at least making so much more money and get attention. And it's due to like the attention economy and economy of scale, a lot of different reasons. They're not necessarily maybe better, but because of many factors, it becomes this law. Our job is to invest in these. So if we invest in a company that gives us 50% more money back in 10 years, the public market could have beaten that. So the headache is that we need to invest in something that gives extraordinary amount of money, like 3 times the money, for the whole collective of companies. And the weird thing is with this is that there's a base risk in any kind of thing. Base risk of like macro risk or people risk or sickness and health. There are all kinds of risks. So the funny thing is, investing in the middle of the curve is almost always a bad risk, because you don't get the potential upside, but you get the same risk as like everybody gets. Like everybody has like a 10% risk all the time. So we need to invest in these that are absurd. And the weird thing is the only way to get absurd is you need to invest in people that are absurd. So no sane person would ever try to build this. And if you take this curve and you plot it underneath, you plot how people are. So you get like a normal distribution curve, like this kind of curve. So most people are this. Most people, if you say, hey, like Christian, should you and I go to Bolivia and set up like a vegan sausage franchise where everybody has to come in, has to be in masquerade costumes? You would be like, I'm in Vienna Hampus. I'm not sure if I told you, but this is a conservative town. So like, like it would be hard to get you out of it. But some people would be like, this is the best idea I've ever heard since you pitched me that there's a sliced cucumber idea. Let's go and do this. So then we go and do this thing. And of course, the problem is like most of these ideas are wrong. So our model has to be even more extreme, which is like, we have to predict that 50% of the ideas just won't work at all. And then 30, 40% of the ideas will work, but will be like good businesses. They will give us like 1 to 2 to 3 times the money, maybe over years. But because half is gone, right? If half of the companies give us 3 times the money back, which is very good. The problem is like if half of them gave 0, that means like we just now gave 1.5 times the money back, like given that we gave same amount of money to everybody. So the problem is like we need these companies to give like a lot more back, right? So they need to be a lot more absurd. And the headache here is like we don't know which one is which. So it's not that we invest. We say we put half in kind of solid stuff and half in crazy stuff, because the solid stuff is definitely not going to work for us. It will work, but it will give us like 1.1 times the money back, which is worthless. So the funny thing for us is like we have to invest in absurd people. So we really look for like when people has like, oh, I used to be the world bouldering champion, but then I got so frustrated and started like a bus company with one of my friends who was backpacking in Africa and figured out buses are the best idea ever. Most people were like, what? How? Or like when I was irritated at like garbage in the Ganges River, I started doing my stand-up pebbling board down the river and picked up garbage. And eventually I actually got in the Guinness Book of Records because I ended up just going further than any other person has ever gone on Ganges River on a stand-up pebbling board, right? And it's like, so like that outlier behavior of like, I'm not going to give up. I have grit. I'm like going to be in this thing is so important. So like you get those two, like you get like the open to advice and like, understand you, the trust, but you also get the like the extremeness. And those two things, I think, create a lot of interesting tension and stuff.
This is such a great explanation. Viewing the public investment market as Tinder and or one night stands, and the private investment market, especially the venture cases, more like a Catholic marriage. There is no divorce, so you need to work together with people for a lifetime, basically.
Yeah, it is a lifetime.
The thing that I would like
it's you have to remember here it's the Mormon church, right? Because we're married to a lot of people at the same time. So like we're actually investing in like 35 companies here. So like it's not true monogamy Catholic marriage. We're married to 35 companies.
Not from your side, but from the others.
No, yeah, from the other side, of course. They have other investors too.
Yeah. This is an interesting twist. It's not Catholic.
Yeah, it's Mormon.
Basically. Yeah, that's true. But the question that I have in mind now is, I mean, I totally agree to what you say. When you invest in ordinary businesses, you will never compete probably Warren Buffett, and this is always an option. I mean, Berkshire Hathaway or BlackRock, for example, or just simple S&P 500. Now we have 5% interest rate back on the savings accounts. Given somebody has 10 million, I mean, it's 500,000 per year. So you need to be above this 20%. The question is, you said, also totally agree, you need the outliers, you need atypical people, because investing in typical people creates typical stories, and this is not what you need to satisfy your LPs. But how do you identify these outliers? What's your emotional signal where you say, this could be the story, this could be the next big thing?
Yeah, I think that it's funny because that's where Joel and Heidi and I are so different. It's so funny because like for me, it is really the agile mind and the clarity of thought. Like I love coming to meetings and actually just saying, just like there's so many meetings that if you look at like my day, is that my day is just chopped up with like between 4 and 20 meetings, not 20, but maybe 15 meetings where like I meet somebody for 30 minutes and try to figure out what they do. And usually the way my meetings look like is that we start by talking 5 minutes about absolutely random stuff. If you were my meeting, I would start by looking at the books in your bookshelf, and I would ask you what you think about the books, and you'd be like, oh, can I just share my slides with this guy? You would be constantly thinking, can you just stop talking about books? I shouldn't have been in this room. I should have a virtual background. I love when people don't have virtual backgrounds, because you get like really good conversations about them and why do they live in Bristol, and like really interesting conversations. So is Vienna actually conservative, or it's really, really interesting. And then after a couple of minutes, I usually say, Christian, are you okay with like me telling you what you do, and then you can fill out with like what I didn't really understand? And usually people are a bit like, okay, I'm never going to show these slides, I guess. So like, go ahead, knock yourself out and continue talking, Mr. VC, because that's what you're good at. Yap, yap, yap. And then I try to tell them what they do, like, a minute or 2 or 3. I'm like, this is what I think you do. And usually the entrepreneurs have a ball, because I get it between 50 and 80% at best. So they're just like sitting there like, interesting, because now, like, if they told me first and I kind of gave them critique on what I didn't understand, it's like nasty critique, right? The good thing now is like, because I started, they immediately know what they actually have communicated wrong. Maybe I'm dumb, so maybe I didn't get some things right, but they realize that I've sent those signals to you. This is what bounces back from the mirror. Interesting. So then they go like, why do you think it's like that? And then I explain that, and like, oh, interesting. And it's not all like that. Like 50, this is correct. And now they don't have to bother the coming 10 minutes of explaining this, because they know I know it, right? So now they can say, no, so like cells can have, like, you can inject live DNA into cells. And I'm like, what? Yeah. It's just a mess. And transcription is just like, it's not that it's a long strand and like, you kind of move it. It's not like a zipper where it just goes through and finds the next thing. It's just like a ton of stuff lying around. And some code is like found by an interpreter and being compiled and run. So like you can just put in live DNA. It just dies fairly quickly. Oh shit, I didn't know. No, exactly. So that's kind of fundamental. And now I'm like, oh, now I understand why that works. Oh shit, I think I do, right? So now they're able to show tolerance and openness quite a lot, right? They get that I don't get it. But they also kind of focus on the time and actually trying to explain something really, really hard for me, which I think is such an extraordinary trait of intelligence that they have to kind of find their footing very quickly. Like the whole thing about like me talking about Bristol, Vienna is like very strange, right? Number two, that me pitching them is very strange. So now I see how agile they are as people. Number two is they have to show a lot of openness in the fact that I don't completely get it and how they'd explain this to me. And they have to show a lot of like just raw intelligence and empathy of like, how do I explain to somebody who hasn't done their PhD in biology? Like, do you know what a cell is? And I'm like, yes. Okay. You know a cell membrane? Yes. Okay, I see some hesitation. Let me explain. And that just shows so much of the thing day to day. Like it shows like how we will interact in the future. Because there are certain things I will say to them. It's like, I don't think that we're priced right. And we will have had that conversation simulated in this first conversation. So this is a lot for me. So like for me, I index so heavily on like extraordinary people that I really like working with, wandering towards the direction I really like. So like, if you say that you're doing a used sock market in Vienna, I have a hard time seeing like $1 billion market in used socks in Vienna. But if you tell me, no, this is just the on-ramp into building essentially a space industry in Kenya. Because Hampus, Kenya is the best situated part of the world because it's in European time zones, but the east of Kenya is just water. So if anything falls down, it falls into water, which means that it's one of the best ramps. And you want to release everything east because the world spins in that direction, which means that it's easier to go up that way. And I'm like, oh, I've never, oh my God. But now I'm like, hey, Christian, get me from the socks to the rocket ship. And you're like, okay, I'll get it. And if you're able to get me there, I'm like, we should do these socks companies because it's going to be one of the best Kenyan rocket ship companies. I love this. The socks and the rockets are it's going to be a couple of years. But I feel like Christian is the kind of person that we're able to do this because like how we handle this call, his ambition levels, like the quick mind. And then I have to think, how much money does he need? Because if you need $400 million, we're not the one for you. We don't have that much money. So that's like match. Just like any relationship, this is like this Mormon relationship that we're going into. Like we have to figure out like if it can work. Can we be married at all? Like just logistically, can we be married, right? But also the big thing is like, would we fall in love and would we enjoy working together?
So you're basically looking for the Elon Musks amongst your entrepreneurs.
I'm not sure if that's a great analogy.
I was just thinking about this rocket ship explanation because it came from X, I think was one of his first ideas, then transitioned to PayPal, then the Tesla, and now SpaceX. And he had this big vision, I think, in his biography. From
I think that exactly. No, of course. I think that one of the greatest things about like it's one of those things balancing is like. I truly believe that the weird thing about the exponential thing about people is that if you meet a person who is like way smarter than any of your friends, or more gritty, or whatever you want to straight parameter. The thing is, it's not a parallel curve. Like the smartest person in the world is not twice as smart as the second part smart. And that person is not twice as smart. So the weird thing is there's just so much luck and everything. And one of the greatest things about luck is that luck favors the prepared. We all know that. Like if you actually do your work, you're going to be a much more higher chance of actually getting there. But luck is one of those things where if you actually think it's going to work, and if you're that crazy, it's like you actually get way further. I think most people spend enormous amount of energy hindering themselves because they're trying to be normal and trying to fit in. And if you lose that thing and saying, okay, I don't need to fit in, I don't need to be normal, then you can think completely new thoughts. And then you essentially a lot of times need somebody that says, yes, well, like, you can do it. So I think that for me, it like boils back to like when I was a kid and did that drawing, like I knew I sucked. I knew I wasn't good at drawing, but somebody loved me anyway, which essentially put in this strange situation where I was allowed to free roam and just try stuff and test stuff. And as an entrepreneur, and some entrepreneurs haven't grown up in a relationship or in a life where they feel loved. Actually, quite the opposite. They feel like they actually are not loved and they have to prove stuff to the world. And some feel that the sky is the limit they could ever want. And it's very different. But I think at the end of the day, it comes with you like reaching for the top, like you saying, I'm not satisfied with this. Like it needs to be better. And I think that drive is so extraordinary. And the strange thing I find is that I think most people undervalue themselves. Most people don't realize how malleable we are as humans, that how, like, take anything that's just, I love it when you read, like, historical counter, like, whatever, the DNA discovery or whatever. You need like, and you think, oh, they discovered it, they're amazing, da 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 da. And then you realize, oh, there were 3 other teams doing the same thing. You're like, what? At the same time, kind of level. And you take like, penicillin, or like a lot of these things, some of them are just random flukes. They were like, he was in the right room. Of course, like he had prepared, like, it's not that like Alexander Fleming would just like randomly put up like a sourdough though, like he tried, right? But it was random that it happened then and there, and he just caught the opportunity. But a lot of the other people are like, they were cohort. They were just like, the classical thing about like, why did Bill Gates succeed? I mean, Bill Gates succeeded because his parents were able to get him in the right place. He was at a university that had a lot of computing power. Back in the days, nobody had it. He kind of seized it and said, I'm not going to go out and date with other people on campus. I'm actually going to sit here and try to get as much computer time as I can, which no one else did. And the thing is, now it's easy to think that it's the nerds that run the world, that people like, that hang out with the computers. But the same thing with everything, right? Like if you just feel like, I think that's a question that a lot of VCs ask that sometimes can be very irritating, but sometimes I think is very interesting, which is, what do you think that nobody agrees with you on? And I think that's I think it's something interesting because like, I find a lot of times that like, we usually try to think the opposite. Most people are trying to think, how do I make sure I'm not discovered? How do I make sure that my imposter syndrome doesn't shine out, that people don't understand that I don't know what I'm doing? And I think all the great entrepreneurs, like everybody we work with, most of them have huge imposter syndrome. They think that shit, I don't know what I'm doing. And we say, nobody does. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, okay? I have no idea what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, but you know what you're doing. No, I have no idea what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, okay, shit, but I definitely know more than you. Oh, but then you're great. It's fine. It's like, you know what I mean? So like, I think it's one of those things where it's so tricky. I think that one has to believe. And it's a constant conversation, I think, in the startup system and the entrepreneurial system and the venture system. Do founders need to be broken, or do they need to like be loved? And I think that most sadly say broken. And I just sometimes like, I don't know. I don't necessarily think you need to be broken. I think it's just like you need to have a very strong intrinsic drive, and you want to like win at something. I think that I built another company in the mid, which I skip in my bio, but was like a sales operations efficiency startup product. And we talked to like these amazing sales operations people that are the ones that keep the CRM systems, the customer relationship management systems of like all the big corporates of the world, keep them clean so you can actually predict stuff and create like quarter reports. And these people are like, nobody knows about them. They're like the IT managers. They sit in the corner and they complain that Salesforce isn't filled out correctly. And it's really strange because they're very, very vital in the system. But it's so funny because we talked to some of these people and asked them like, how do they build the sales org? How do they engage salespeople? How do they build actually sales efficiency? Because sales is one of those things. It's like, it's a born thing. It's a dark magic. Some people are persuasive. But then you look at actually the data and like what I did for 4 years, it's not. Like some people are persuasive and they're great, right? But the thing is that it's a system. It's like you have to have a curriculum, you have to have a style, you have to be able to do certain things. Otherwise, you can't get people over. And it's also like we very much view sales a lot of times as very malicious, like, it's like tricking people. But I think it's fascinating because I think that when you actually look at that trait, it's a lot of empathy as well, right? But most of all, it's a drive. It's a drive. And what one of these people told me, this magical thing, was that when he recruited salespeople, he said he showed them 3 things. And I do this still today with people. He showed them a $sign, the word winning, and the word recognition. And he said, which ones would you want? And he said, every salesperson coming through the door that pointed at the $sign is like, I want the dollars. He said, this interview ends now. Thank you very much. Because he said, I can't have a salesperson who wants money. And even if we all think, what, isn't that what all salespeople want? Because the thing is, it goes up and down and up and down, and some quarters you win, sometimes you're not, and you're just going to be like, you're going to be like this, the true story of the people who died in the Vietnam War being prisoners, because when Christmas came and weren't let out, they were just so disappointed. Whereas the ones who were the Stoics, who just stayed in there and think, okay, I'm just going to, they were the ones that actually got alive. And then he said, like, the people who say recognition, I don't want to hire them as salespeople. They should be in customer success and support. They're the ones that want to like get a thank you from the customer. The salespeople will never get a thank you from the customer. I want the person who say winning. I want the person who says, I want to feel inside my body that we won. That's what I want. And that is the very same thing with entrepreneurs. If you want the dollars, you're not going to build a great company. If you want the recognition, you'll be famous, but you're not going to build a great company. If you want to win and win in your heart, you can actually build something which is truly great.
Yeah, the downside of the power law is that success comes very late. So the big dollars come after a 10 or 20 years period and not at the beginning, not in the way that people envision it. And I think this is where many entrepreneurs stumble after 2, 3, or 4 years. That the big wins don't come in right away. You need to add another 10 years and push through and move forward. What I found very interesting in your explanation was your story from your childhood, where you painted the apple. I mean, basically every time when somebody starts with something, it sucks. So this is quite natural. And then people need to push through. And being explorative is a great thing. I mean, going out, talking to different people, learning new things, trying new things out. Until they have a hit with a company. Mm-hmm. But then I find it very interesting, this turning point, like in your story from your company, you started something, you explored, you tried new things out, and then had the hit in the mobile industry and started scaling to 180 people. Mm-hmm. And I found in my environment that many entrepreneurs can't get out of this creative mindset and just keep exploring and say, okay, throw it away, it works, and I'll do the next thing. How do you handle that as a venture capitalist? I mean, you need to make money at the end of the day. How do you get or support people to switch from this creative mindset on a corporate level to the scaling mindset and say, okay, now focus. Creativity is over, for at least for this part. Focus and move that forward and scale it up. How do you do it?
I think that is, funny enough, it's not that big of a problem for us, because I think that many of the people we meet and date, they've already taken the leap. So like the thing is that if we would have, I think one of the reasons I think that we need a lot of like open research and university research is that it's like research for you getting tenure, research for you getting your PhD together, which means you have to go where no one else has gone before. Like you get a PhD by showing something that no one else has shown before, which means that a lot of times you read a PhD thesis and you're like, who in the world needs this? But it's because the person had to wander off and like talk about like mycorrhizal roots and like electoral currency, if they can actually do this and that, and does this affect like tree bark or not? And people are like, how do you come up with this? And I'm like, because no one did this, so I had to do this, right? And I think that the headache with trying to get that person to say, how do you commercialize it, is the person is not trying to do that. The person is trying to go where no one else has been gone before and just lift the flag and say, well, no one's been here. And now I can explain this, but yes, I can maybe have a chance at a PhD, right? So like that's one kind that people are all not like trained to, right? And if you take a corporate environment, people are essentially trained to keep their jobs. Like you just like do not do anything, because the thing is you will very rarely be promoted for doing different, but you will very highly risk be fired. So like the distribution curve in a corporate is very different. Like you essentially have high risk, very low reward. So like your behavior is like incentivized. So the interesting thing is like that a lot of people we work with, they've kind of honed in on a problem they want to solve, and maybe even a solution kind of exactly. And now sometimes we actually have to pull them out of it a bit and be like, well, yeah, I know you want to do this, but like maybe this, what do you think about this? What are the risks long term, right? So like a lot of the balance thing is like we actually meet people who are like in the midst of the ski track. They're just like pounding along and like skiing in this race, and they're like, they know what they're doing. And we come along and it's like, whoa, we need to like, get the wax off your skis. And they're like, I have no time to brake. Just give me more fuel. Give me power bars and I can go faster. And we're like, we will actually take you off the ski track. Like you like, wait a minute, let's talk about your ski technique, right? And it's one of those things that if you want to win the local race, you should just never take off your skis. Just ski and get more energy, caffeine and sugar into your body, and just ski and win the race. If you want to win the Olympics, you just have to have a lot of time where you actually get off the ski track and watch videos of other people, skiers, and ask people about advice and stuff. So that's the interesting thing. We meet a lot of people who said, I want to win the Olympics. And we're like, oh, interesting. Okay, let's figure this out. But I think the fun, like if you play back to where the conversation like started with the entrepreneur, I don't meet the people and they don't start with call by saying, I want to win the Olympics. Because then usually we won't invest. We're just like, oof, whoa, okay. That was like, I'm not sure we want this conversation. We want a conversation like, who are you? Why are you doing this? What do you think about the world? And let me explain it back to you and all these like quirkiness to figure out if you actually, how do you handle it? Because a lot of times if you say one of the Olympics, you're the skier in the ski track who have no time to talk about how to wax your skis. But if you're the person who's like now having a very esoteric conversations about everything, we know that we can easily take you off the ski track and talk about like, you're actually going to be we think you're going to be one of the best pole vaulters in the world. If you look at your body composition, you're a pole vaulter. And you're like, I want to be a ski racer. I know you're saying that, but you don't look like a ski racer. Maybe let's do one more try, but I can promise you that you're a pole vaulter like body. So like there are many people that come to you, and like if you take that analogy, if you look like enterprise, small, medium businesses, and consumer sales, those are so different. If you look at a company selling to consumers, essentially it is more or less the least time you spend in production talking to customers, the better it is. You essentially just need to ship it out the door and don't get them to ask questions. Because you're giving so many little money per conversation, so that any conversation you have is a waste of time. If you look at the mid part, when you're doing small and medium businesses, you're working with people that think they're important, but in the grand scheme of things, they're important, but not that important to you because they don't give you millions. So you have to figure out a way to like very efficiently have conversations with them without being irritating. So like it's not really telemarketing, but it is kind of telemarketing. You have to kind of set up a way to like have conversations. What's your needs? What's your budget? Like what's your timeline to do this? Who signs? And if you talk to enterprise, this is like very different. This is like you going have these deep conversations about who signs, what's the political order, like how does this work, right? So sometimes we can meet a company that has like a very, very interesting product, but it's so clear that it's not going to work with small, medium businesses because it requires like weeks of integration. And weeks of integrations means that all their profit is going to be gone because the customer won't pay this. But for enterprise, this would work. So the question now is like, are you interested in talking to big corporates or like, do you want to not do this? So this is like one of those conversations where we have with people and we kind of figure out, I think there's a company there. If you just, maybe you should look at this. And we don't know, right? Like this is one of the interesting things. We're not ski athletes. We're not pole vaulters or whatever things. We just have, we have done one sport and then we've watched a ton of sports. So for us, it's like maybe actually your body composition of a pole vaulter could actually make you one of the best ski racers. Maybe. Like, I don't know, interesting enough. Let's actually think about this. And that open-mindedness from both sides is so, like, it leads us great ways. And I mean, have to think about it. We meet enormous amount of companies every week, and we say, no, thank you, I'm not going to waste your time, to 95% plus of all those conversations every week. And then a handful of them, we say, we should talk again, and you should talk to one of my co-founders. And we try to, like, figure out this out. And most of them, we say, no, we're not going to do right. And then there's a handful of them that we just say, yeah, we should invest in these. And the funny thing is some of these, like we have at least one company that we invested because the person who talked to them could not say no. The person who talked to them the person said no twice, said no. The company followed up and then got one of us on a call again. And then that person said no after a lot of consideration and going through the material. And that person came out of the room and one of them also said, why can't you say no? The person said, I don't know. I don't know. Like they just get me on the phone again and again and again. And they're not salesy people. Like they just like intellectually got the person back on track again. And then we just said, we should invest them. What? Why? Because the fact that they get you back again shows that they're able to kind of level with you in a way that is inhumane. It's an outlier thing that they're able to get you back in a busy week where you have so many other things to do And the person was like, yeah, I think we should invest. And we invested. I mean, of course, we were positive to the company, but it was crazy that the fact that one of the things in it was the fact that we just like, we can't say no. This is interesting. And most of the time, we actually say no. We say no to so many companies that all three of us think is a good company, but none of us loves. So we just feel like this is going to be great, but no, I don't want to work with them. And not because they're bad people, it's just because I don't think it's fun.
I mean, given the limited amount of capital, it's quite clear that, and the amount of opportunities on the market, it's quite clear that you have to say no very often. But with this case that you mentioned, I understood you in a way that you lost your ability of saying no to this one case. What made this case so different?
I think in that case, it was like, I think it was one of those companies where it was just the founders. And like they didn't have a lot. They had a strong thesis of what they build. And I think what's funny about it is that when you're in that early and you don't have a product, like the thing is that it's really about people, right? It's really, really about people. And it's about how they were so dynamic and so smart. And they also actually built the company for exactly the right reasons. Like we felt we have huge empathy for the goal. We really like the goal and the people. And you're super smart and super gritty. But we just felt like, oh, this is going to be a messy market. I don't know. But then like we just felt that these people, like sometimes I think we end up investing, like the prerequisite for us is always we love the people. Like if we don't love the people, it doesn't matter. Like we have so many companies where we say it's an amazing company idea. I like the people, but I don't love the people. Then we're not going to do it. It doesn't matter because we're going to be married like for 10 years. Like it doesn't matter. Like I'm not going to be able to do it. And they're not bad people. Like there are plenty of companies we meet where like, oh, this is really nice and it's an amazing opportunity, but I can't spend my days with this. But then you have people where like we love the people, but sometimes we struggle with the idea. We're just like, I just don't like this. So I had an email sent Sunday night, which was a company I met for 2 weeks, which is very long. Met multiple times, had multiple WhatsApp chats with them and messages and everything. And I just felt in the end, I was like, I love them as people. I think they're going to be extraordinary. I can't just see this business working this way. I just can't. And I think I could easily work with them. The only reason I wasted so much of their time was the fact that I really felt they're extraordinary people and really enjoyed working with them and talking to them. But then I just felt the thing they're building, they have to probably pivot once, they have to probably fix this, they have to probably fix that. I think they actually do that better without capital. Because the problem is like, if they get a lot of rocket fuel, they will start skating along the ramp. And they probably need to kind of walk in the desert and go, fuck, first. And if they do that, they come back and say, actually, rethinking it. We're going to go directly to the rocket ship and not actually SOX. And we're like, great, we're in. And like we have companies where we've said no, and then we coached them and worked with them for a bit. And then suddenly one day we just said after 6 weeks, we'd love to lead you around. Like I did one of those investments last year where the founder, in the middle of those calls, he said like, what? And I was like, yeah, now I really love this. And he said, but you said this is hard. Yeah, but it's really fun to work with the other. And I think that if there's anybody who will make it, it will be you. And that's like the worth bet taking.
I totally agree. Having some hardship helps straightening out the idea and getting in the right direction. When do you feel that it's the right time to provide fuel to entrepreneurs instead of letting them walk some miles more in the desert? What's the right point in time, in your opinion? How do you identify it?
Yeah, it's very, very tricky. I think it's really, really tricky because I think that like many, it's all boils down to like a couple of different things. But one is how the founder handles money. Like, will they start burning cash and scaling? One is the market maturity. Is like sometimes you can throw complete shit out and it just sticks and it starts growing. And you're like, okay, it works, but we know that it doesn't work. Like we know that the reason this works is that the demand is huge and like your product is mediocre plus, but there's nothing else there. So now it gives us time to actually work closely with the customers and actually figure out the need and actually like solve it the right way. And I mean, that was how my first company was built. I mean, if you look at what we built, it was not that our solution was like 10 out of 10 stars. It was just like, it was impossible. Nobody could solve it. We solved it in a mediocre way, but then we had 2 years to take mediocre to good. And then we had 6 more years to take mediocre to very good. And then we had like 1 or 2 years to take like good to excellent. But like, I mean, like in the beginning, there was nothing. So we had time to work super closely with the problem. So there's so many of these factors where like we talk to founders. And I think that one of the things I think a lot about is also what kind of pain we're putting people through. Because there's some people who just don't have the opportunity. Like if you don't give them the money, they will not start this company. They won't try. And I think that's the other thing, is like sometimes we meet people where we feel like it's a very delicate balance, because we don't want to give people money because we want them to succeed. We need to give them money because we think they will succeed. Because at the end of the day, we have beneficiaries of pension funds. So we can't just say, these are the people that ought to get money on the planet, here's money. So we have to be like, I think this will succeed. I actually think this will succeed. But I have to get you to realize that if I give you €1,000,000 right now, you can't just hire a team of 12. Like, that's not going to work. So we have a lot of those conversations, which is like, what are the next steps? Like, what's between the socks and the rocket ship? Like, what's going to happen here? And like, how do we pace it? And the strange thing is, like, it's also a lot, like, you can build two kinds of companies, essentially. Like, you can build many kinds of companies, but on one aspect and lens, you can build a company that gets to kind of a cash flow positive, so that you don't need more venture money to actually survive. Like, you float, you're like default alive. So like, you actually have you can actually decide if you want to bring in more money to scale what you do, but at least now you can decide. Or you have the other company, which is like a deep J-curve company, which is usually called, which is like, you don't have anything. You just need to get more money to get anything, right? There's just not enough for you to, like, there's not enough customer value so that you would actually charge them depending on your team size and tech and complexity and timelines. And I think that there are certain ideas where we just look at and say, because what strange aspect here is that if you're the second kind of company, you need to get venture capital to come in. Like, if you're the first kind of company, you can build a company to a point where you're floating, you have lots of time of practice, you're going to be the best surfer out there. It's going to take time, but people say like, wow, she's the best surfer, let's go with them, let's back them and give them sponsorship. Maybe somebody gives you money all the time, but you don't actually need it. You can actually just prove that you're a great surfer. The second kind of company is like after 12 months, nobody will understand if it even works but you. But then the question is, will you be able to get other people to invest? So one of the weird things, I think venture, who said this, said Danko, I remember his first name, he said this amazing thing, Canadian entrepreneur investor, which is like one of the best inventions that venture ever did, was calling it valuation and not price. Because one of the weird things here is, like, when we're investing, we're one of the first investors or the first investor, we give you money, and that money is essentially so that you get 12 to 18, 24 months to build something, so someone else gives you money. So that then, 12 to 24 months later, someone else gives you money, someone else gives you money. And then eventually, whoa, you're floating. And now you have like a massive ship that's floating, not like a surfboard. You actually have a massive ship because you actually got so much capital, right? But the thing there is, like, if you call it price, then it's like, oh, we invested this price. And we're like, wow, this can't be worth 10 million euros. And it's like, it's two people in a shed. Like, they have nothing. Like, they have a sketch. The slides are ugly, right? But we have to, like, no, it's not a price. It's a valuation. Eventually, we're like 5x stupid how dumb we are. The next time they raise money, they're like 2x stupid. Like, it's very expensive. The next time they raise money, they're just like 1x stupid. The next time they raise money, this is sane. And then it shows historically that we were actually smart if this works right. Because we know the probability, it won't. So like, we need to build that into the model, that most of the time it didn't work. And when it works, like, we were right and the entrepreneur was right. And that's also the thing to realize, is that some of these people we invest in, not only is this the money that will give them the shot, but it's very important for us to realize that if they fail, quote unquote fail, if they run out of money, this could be a very bad blow. So we would never invest in somebody if we feel like they actually, back to like, are the greatest entrepreneurs, are they broken or are they loved? I think that if they are truly broken and in a really bad and sad way, the problem is, like, if they fail, this could turn really, really bad. So we have a lot of responsibility to make sure that you don't walk away from this like in a really bad state. And I think that I try to remind a lot of people that, like, the ways you can fail as an entrepreneur is you can run out of your own personal money that you feel like, you're infinitely in debt. That is fail. That is completely fail. You can do the same with health and friends. You can run in a situation where you have no friends and no health, and like, you're in a really bad state mentally and physically, health and also with friends. Or you can fail the third time, which is like, you become a complete asshole. Like, and all of these three, I know people who build extraordinary companies and they reached one of these three states. So they had no friends and no health and no nothing, but on paper they were billionaires maybe, or millionaires. And then you have people who are like great successes on like, the technology media, but they're complete assholes. And that's also fail. So I think that, but folding your company and running out of money and having to like fire employees and telling customers doesn't work and telling investors not going to have money, in our world, that's normal business. Which is very, very hard, because it's the same thing as if you're gunning to be the best ski racer in the Olympics, not getting on a pedestal is not a failure. It is very normal. Like, you competed in the Olympics, that's extraordinary. The strange thing is we need, and you need, to believe that second place is first loser, while we have the empathy that this will probably not get you on a pedestal.
And keep pushing for the next race, and keep working forward, moving forward.
Exactly. That's why even an intrinsic motivation. You can't like be motivated by like the fancy building or your salary or title, because then you're going to run out of steam. The time that you don't get out on Christmas or Easter, you will run out of steam. You need to be like, just like Apple have the pride, like you need to be like, this product's going to get better. We're only going to have people we love. We're going to build the best company culture. We're going to keep making this rocket ship the best thing ever. This is how this company is supposed to work. Like, we don't allow this, we don't allow that. This is how we make it. And people say, oh, we might be delayed a month. Doesn't matter. Like, I think it's like we have to make it the right way. And that's, of course, a balance, because you can make it a way where you get, as you said, with the creative mode, you can also do the other mode where like you don't get anywhere because like you're perfectionist and you don't get anything. I mean, the perfectionist is the opposite of getting done. So like, I think it's really tricky, right? I think it's really tricky. I think about this, and I think about the analogy when you said creative. I think it's so funny because look at people playing Minecraft. You can play Minecraft in creative mode or survival mode. Mm-hmm. Like, it's kind of great naming there. It's like, I think a lot of startups are running in survival mode. But the way to get good at Minecraft is you play creative mode first.
Yeah. I mean, it's also a lot of hardship. When I think there was this biography of the first black baseball player. Was a great movie. I watched the movie. And I think the thing that is comparable with entrepreneurship is that initially it's a lot of hardship, but people need to love the game and need to want to stay in the game, regardless of the feedback they get. And there was this great scene when the white trainer said to the black guy, are you really sure you can do that? Because people will hate you. When you go out on the pitch, they will hate you for what you do, but you need to stay calm, you need to stay stoic, and you need to push through. How do you identify these character traits in people? How do you test them?
Yeah, I think the funny thing is, like, this is the conversation I had this morning with this friend in another board, where like we discussed exactly that, like, how do you test this? And they were saying, like, do you do any tests on psychometric testing and scorecards and everything? I think that, I don't know. I think we just try to, it's gut feel. And I think that the funny thing is, like, if I told people we had a test and like a setup and like a device even that we put on somebody's finger, I think that we could do whatever we wanted, because people want to hear that. I think at the end of the day, I think that so many professions in life are guts. I think it's so funny. I think about this all the time. That there are two funny things about getting hired or climbing the corporate ladder. Is like, one is that people always get fired when they reach their, what is it, top maximum stupidity factor, what it's called. And the reason is, of course, like, you started something and you're great at the job, so you get promoted, and you get rated promoted. And the second you stop being promoted, that means you're not good at your job, right? Which is like a very interesting thing, because otherwise you'll be promoted, which means that every person who gets promoted, when they don't get promoted, when you meet people who've been in the same job for 7 years in the same position in a corporate ladder, they're not good at their job. They should go down one step because they were great at the previous thing. So that's kind of one thing I think is funny. But I think the other thing I think is very funny, which is not true. So anybody in that exact story, like, you're not stupid, you're a great person. The other thing I think is really funny is that the higher you go up in the organization, the more you're paid for not knowing what you're doing. Like, if you actually work with a thing that is like the thing that you start with doing, if you're a developer or like a whatever, pearl fisher, or like a craft person, or like whatever you are, like the thing you're good at it because that's the thing you've done, right? And you know what you're doing, because otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. And then somebody promotes you, and now you're leading other people, and you're not that great at it, but you handle the unknown. You handle, like, oh, well, like, this person's sick. How do you do this? And I do this. And then one day somebody's like, you're really good at this. You should be promoted. And you're like, I know how to code. I led a small team of coders, but I can't run an organization of coders. Like, this is what I do. Oh, you're great at it. And now actually what you're doing is that you're essentially getting paid to handle that you don't know anything, but you're handling anyway. And that's the same thing. The higher up you go, your salary is essentially, you don't know what's going to happen, but we trust you. And I think that's really funny, because that means that if you're an entrepreneur, you essentially are the person that's least good at your job. Because everybody you hire know what they're doing, hopefully. Otherwise you wouldn't hire them.
I mean, talking about entrepreneurship at the early days that you mentioned, I mean, as a VC, you're looking for outlier ideas, contrarian ideas, which means looking for the really dumb ideas. on the market, because if everybody says it's a great idea, there is no value in it anymore, because the market is already at the position where they value other companies, competitors enough that they don't want to pay a premium for the next one, except Apple.
Exactly.
And
I think about this. I think about this all the time. I don't know how many times. Like 10 years ago, I was invited to talk about angel investing. I've angel invested in 100+ companies, and I think that somebody asked me like at one of these angel forums to talk about my angel investment philosophy and strategy and la 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 la. And I kind of said, I opened up by saying, it was like Q&A, and I opened up by saying it's that I essentially want a situation where Christian finds it obvious, I find it obvious, no one else finds it obvious. Like, this is what I want. Like, I want to be like, this is what socks to rockers. And I'm like, I get it. And then I really don't want a situation where everyone else says, yeah, I get it. And it's so funny because like whenever anybody says, oh, so what do you mean? And I think that the problem is like, if everybody thinks it obvious, it either doesn't work because it actually doesn't work. Like, for some reason, because people have tried, right? No, people haven't tried. Or that if there's so much competition that the margins are going to be so thin that it like economically won't be able to scale, and you win in operational excellence, and startups can't be operational excellence. That's like one of the hardest parts to be, right? Startups can only be product superiority or customer intimacy, and then they can grow into that part of the triangle. But it's so funny because like I remember in the investor forum, it was like, I think it was like a handful of people that agreed with me, and like the rest were just like roaring questions about like blah 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 blah. And it's then I had to share this story. Like there's so many times I invested in a startup where like I talked to this founder, and this was like back in whatever 2000, what is it, 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever, that time when I talked, and then I said, I'm in, I love this. And the entrepreneur were like, what? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we're having this conversation because you want me to invest. And they're like, no, I just wanted advice. And like, I actually didn't think you want to invest. And I was like, why? I guess nobody's ever agreed with me. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, no, I think most people just think this is dumb. And I said, but that's why I'm investing. And then we actually had usually like 5 minutes of untangling what just happened, because they're just like, wait, do you think I'm dumb or do you think it's dumb? And I'm like, no, I think it's good, but I think most people think it's dumb. And then, like this conversation there, the coming 5 minutes were very interesting when they were like, I'm trying to understand now, what's your rationality of investing? Like what's happening? And I found so many times I realized, I love this person, I love this idea, and I love that no one else would agree with me. And then of course there's a degree to that. Like if you invest in something that no one will ever agree in, you can't get more capital. So like you have to get something that you can get to the point where people will agree with you.
Yeah, but how does this point come? I mean, the best, I mean, it's from public markets, not private market, but for me, the best current example on the market is NVIDIA. I mean, now cheap semiconductor, it's quite logical. Everybody
agrees.
We need everybody agrees. But this is not the point in time when I would say a venture capitalist would want to buy NVIDIA, because everybody agrees to it. 2013 was the time, or 2010 or 2007 or 2006 or 2001 or 1992 when they started. This was the time when a venture capitalist would want to invest. Do you know an example from the private market that exemplifies to founders what VCs are looking for, how the thing should look like, the dumb idea?
I mean, the thing is, it's all the time for us, right? Like it's like every single day. I think that the things that get past the first filter are the things that we feel like this is a fairly dumb thing, let's try. I think that if one of us has a call, I think that when we look at the presentation and we feel like it's a bad idea, completely bad idea, and not the people we want, we don't take a call. We just said this is probably not it, right? And it could also be like it's a good idea, but we don't actually get enough of it. Like we don't understand it. Like let's skip it. But then the ideas we have meetings with, it's like these are the people, these are the ideas. We think it could have something, and I would say a lot of them, like we actually end up saying no, either because it's not a people fit, or because we think that this is going to work, but it's not going to be great. And it's really funny because like that's the normal case. Like on a normal day, like when we have lunch, we go through the 3 or 4 companies we talked to in the morning and said, I think you might like this. Okay, tell me about it. And then the other person tells, and we're less like, yeah, I see it working, but tell me about the founder. And the other person says like, yeah, but we did this, but then this did this. And like, yeah, I really don't see it. I mean, I know what you're saying. This is going to be like 10 million, euro turnover within 2 or 3 years. And we say that like, as it's like, but that is like, if you think about it, holy shit, that's amazing. But then we're like, how do you get above 10 million? Isn't this the problem? Yeah, I know. Do you think the person would sell early? No, I don't think so. I don't know. And they're like, oh, let me have a call with them. It's like, no, I shouldn't have brought it up. No, sorry. It's going to be a good company. And then that means no. And it's so funny. And it's so funny. And like when the companies where we're like, oh my God, this almost makes yourself comfortable. Then it's like, that could be like a very quick no. Or it could be like, we should definitely look closer at this. So
Hampus,
it is so strange.
it's fantastic talking to you. I just checked the time, and we are 2 hours in the conversation, and I could easily go another 2 hours with you listening to your stories. It's fantastic, and I think you have a lot to say, so we could get this going. How would you like to proceed?
I
Question
think
to
that
you.
my brain is melting a bit now. So I think that
Okay,
I need a ton of water and a ton of rest. And I think
super.
that so I think that I'm like happy to have, like, if you want a handful of questions, I can do it. But it's like that I realized that I'm starting to lose the beginning of the sentence when I'm in the middle of the sentence. And I think it's also because we have to remember ourselves that I'm not one person. It's like one part of my emergent personality starts a sentence, and then the other part of my personality is trying to figure out where that ends and take over. And right now in the situation is that they're not doing perfect handover. So some of these sentences end in a surprising way because the other part of me tried to finish what the first person said.
Yeah, you're creative. You're a creative guy.
And it's
I
not
love it.
creativity now. It's being tired, I think.
Mm.
So
Um, is there anything open that you would like to address in the last part before we
I
wrap
think
up?
no, I think that not for me. If you have questions that can be answered in like very short sentences or yes nos, then I'm super happy to have them because that's the time span my
I
brain
would
has.
I would wrap up with the question, what are you looking for? Which type of founders should reach out to you?
It's a good question. I think that if you're working, so one thing I didn't mention, of course, and we didn't talk about that, we run a climate fund. So like I think what's important is it needs to be somebody who works with a climate idea. And I think to specify on that is that most of the companies like we invested in are not the ones that you think of when you think about climate companies. So when people think about climate, they typically think about growing forests and planting trees or sucking down carbon from the sky. We believe that most like extraordinary climate companies will be ones that do something that we do today, but we do it way, 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 way better. So it might be that how to transport goods with electricity or how to grow crops in like a better way or something. And it's something where, like, if you think about it, you realize, oh yeah, this is climate, but it's not going to suck down carbon from the sky, maybe. We've done a handful of suck down carbon from the sky in different shapes or form, but most of the entrepreneurs we work with are people who try to take an existing business and they just make it modern and better and more efficient, which means that it actually is super compatible with the future. So those should reach out. And the other thing is like we invest super early stage. So don't send us when you have like one page of an idea and it's only you in a shed and you work at a corporate and you're thinking about leaving, because that's not us. Like you need to have gotten further. But if it's you and a co-founder, and you have like a bit of a prototype even, or maybe like a first customer thought, that's like the stage when we typically engage. So like you and someone else doing something and you're like on a direction, that's great. So typically that, and then we like Europe the most. It's easier for us to Europe. We do US, but we really, really prefer Europe. We have done so far, we've done roughly 10 investments in the UK, 5 in France, Benelux, 5 in DACH, and 5 in the Nordics, and then 5 in the US, roughly. And we're always like want to be like the main investor, the first investor. And the reason is that we see as a very common reason that startups fail is that the investors are not super investors, that they don't take risk really well. And we want to have an alignment of the other investors and us. So like the most common reason that startups don't really succeed is that they don't reach the magical product market fit where what they build is what the market wants at the price. The second one is that the founders start fighting, which is usually actually because they don't actually get product market fit. Because if they do, they're sailing on a ship at sea and they actually focus on survival and scaling and not so much about fighting. And they actually find love in the craft a lot of times. And then number 3 is, in my book, is that the investors are just idiots. And the investors are like wasting the founder's time doing something. So for us, it's very important that we're the main investor or invest with somebody that we truly agree with as people. And we feel like we have the same view on risk and on people so that the other investor is not trying to drive the founders to work like 100 hours a week, or that the other investor wants to sell as soon as there's value or something, so that we're both trying to win the Olympics in a sustainable way. So if you're that kind of founder, then we'd love to talk to you.
What's the best way to reach out to you?
We have a forum online that people can just like fill in, but you can also like it's very, very easy to see who we know. Like, if you look at LinkedIn, we're all over the place, and on Twitter and other places. So like it's very, very easy to just ask somebody, can you please see if you can introduce me? If you do that, then ask the person just to send your material so we can just look at it. And we promise to get back. We respond every single person that pings up with a reasonable idea. Like if somebody says they built a perpetuum mobile that will take them to moon, we sometimes don't respond because we can end up in arguments about infinite amount of energy and stuff. So then we just don't respond. But if it is that they do a reused socks factory in Vienna that's going to take them to build rocket ships, and there are 2 people and they have a sock recycling company, like on a startup prototype idea, we will definitely respond. We will probably say, before we continue, maybe you should outline something about how you get to rockets.
Hampus, thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed listening to your stories, and I wish you good luck with your investments. And I'm looking forward to see the next unicorns coming out of your fund.
Thanks a lot, Christian. And it was great to talk to you. It was really good. And you asked questions all over the place, which were really great. And I think that I hope I was able to make it coherent. Sometimes I felt like my mind was wandering.
I enjoyed the conversation a lot. Thank you very
Great.
much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.